He never meant to fall asleep. But exhaustion doesn't ask permission. While Nathan Cole sat on that park bench watching his 3 5-year-old daughters play, his eyes closed for just a second. And in that single, unguarded moment, his girls decided to take matters into their own tiny hands. They walked straight up to the most beautiful, most untouchable-looking woman in the entire park, pressed a crumpled piece of paper into her palm, and said, "Our daddy is lonely. Please call him." She almost laughed, almost threw it away. She didn't. And that one decision, made by 3 children who barely reached her waist, would tear 2 lives completely apart before it ever had a chance to put them back together. Stay with me. This story is going to cost you something. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this one travels. The alarm went off at 5:47 in the morning, same as it always did, and Nathan Cole reached over and silenced it before it could wake the girls. That was the rule. That had always been the rule. The apartment walls were thin, the mornings were fragile, and if even one of the triplets woke up before 6, the whole day started sideways. So he moved carefully, lowering his feet to the cold hardwood floor the way a man steps onto ice, testing every inch before he committed his weight. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the dark. Just a moment. He'd learned to take them where he could find them. The bedroom was small. There was no getting around that. The entire apartment was small. A 2-bedroom place on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street that had seen better decades. The radiator knocked every morning like it was trying to get out. One of the kitchen cabinet doors had been hanging on a single hinge since February, and every time Nathan told himself he'd fix it this weekend, something else came up. It always came up. He pattered down the hallway past the girls' room, pausing at their door the way he always did. Not opening it, just listening. 3 small sets of lungs, breathing. He let out a breath of his own and kept moving. The kitchen was a narrow galley with just enough room to turn around if you weren't carrying anything. He filled the coffee maker, leaned against the counter, and stared out the window at the city beginning to gray itself awake. The sky over San Francisco in October was the color of old dishwater. Not quite dark, not quite light, just this flat, heavy in-between that matched the feeling in his chest most mornings. He'd stopped trying to name that feeling a long time ago. He picked up his phone from the counter, a reflex he hated himself for, and scrolled through the emails that had come in overnight. 3 from clients who hadn't paid. 1 from his accountant, Marcus, with a subject line that read, "Nathan, we need to talk this week. Not optional." And a forwarded message from the city planning office regarding the Oak Ridge District Community Center proposal, confirming that the public presentation meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. He read that last one twice, set the phone down, picked it up again. The Oak Ridge project had taken him 4 months to develop. 4 months of late nights after the girls were in bed, bent over his drafting table with cold coffee and a growing panic he kept very carefully pressed down where no one could see it. The project wasn't just work. It wasn't just money, though God knew he needed the money. It was the kind of project he'd spent his career waiting for. A real community center for a neighborhood that actually needed one, designed around the people who would use it, not the investors who would fund it. Schools, small businesses, families who'd lived in Oak Ridge for 3 generations. He'd poured everything into that proposal. If he didn't win the bid, Cole Architecture would be finished. He'd run the numbers enough times to know it wasn't pessimism anymore. It was arithmetic. The coffee maker beeped. He poured a mug and drank it standing at the counter, looking at nothing. Walter. By 8 o'clock, the apartment had transformed into a different place entirely. That was the only word for it. Transformed. Like a switch flipped somewhere. The stillness of early morning gave way to a noise level that never quite seemed possible from 3 5-year-olds. They moved through the apartment like a weather system, each of them with her own distinct approach to the morning. Lily, the oldest by 4 minutes, came out of the bedroom fully dressed in mismatched clothes, striped leggings under a floral dress, her dark hair already attempted into pigtails that were slightly more chaos than style, and announced that she was hungry and also that she'd already decided today was a craft day. "It's Saturday," she said, climbing onto her chair at the kitchen table with the authority of someone chairing a board meeting. "We should make things." "Good morning to you too," Nathan said. She considered that. "Good morning. Can we make things?" Behind her came Sophie, still in pajamas, dragging a stuffed elephant by one worn ear. Sophie was the quietest of the three, which was relative because she was still loud by any reasonable standard, but she had a quality of stillness that her sisters didn't, a way of watching a room before she entered it. She climbed into her chair without a word and waited for her cereal with the patience of someone much older. Then Mia. Mia came out of the bedroom wearing a single sock, her pajama top inside out, and a pair of Nathan's sunglasses that she'd found somewhere and that were nearly as large as her face. She walked straight to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there studying its contents with deep professional seriousness, and then announced, "We're out of orange juice." "We've been out of orange juice since Wednesday," Nathan said. "That's bad." "I know. I'll get more." "You keep saying that." He looked at her over his coffee mug. She looked back at him from behind his enormous sunglasses, completely unapologetic. "You're 5, he said. "Yes," she agreed, like this was relevant information. He made them cereal and sat across the table from them and watched them eat, and for a few minutes the weight in his chest was lighter. Not gone. It was never gone. But lighter. They argued about what kind of crafts to make. Lily wanted paper flowers. Sophie wanted a bird. Mia wanted to make something she called a machine, though she couldn't describe what it was supposed to do. Only that it needed tape, a lot of tape, and probably some batteries. "You're not getting batteries," Nathan said. "I might need batteries." "You're not." She ate her cereal and didn't argue. That meant she was already figuring out a workaround. After breakfast, while Nathan washed the bowls and half listened to a podcast he'd already heard twice, Lily appeared at his elbow. "Daddy." "You seem sad." He turned off the water, dried his hands on the dish towel, crouched down to her level, which was something he'd started doing years ago before they were old enough to understand it, because he still believed, that children deserved to have conversations that happen face to face and not from 6 feet in the air. "I'm okay," he said. She studied him the way she sometimes did, with this disconcerting thoroughness, like she was reading something written in small print. "You have the line," she said. "What line?" She pointed between his eyebrows. "The line. You get it when you're worried." He touched the spot. "I didn't know you noticed that." "We all notice," she said, as though this were obvious. "Sophie says it means you didn't sleep again. Mia says it means you're thinking about money." He was quiet for a second. "Mia said that?" "She hears things." He pulled Lily into a hug that she tolerated for about 3 seconds before wriggling free because she was 5 and there were crafts to be made. But he held on for those 3 seconds. He held on like it meant something, because it did. The park was Lily's idea. She made a formal argument for it after breakfast while he was answering emails at the kitchen table. The weather was okay, they'd been inside all morning, and crafts could wait. The argument was so organized and so calmly delivered that Nathan suspected she'd practiced it in the bedroom while Sophie and Mia provided editorial feedback. He said yes. Crane Park was 8 blocks from the apartment, a decent-sized city park with a sandbox, a small climbing structure, a duck pond that had no ducks, and a scattering of benches along the main path. It wasn't remarkable. It wasn't the kind of park you'd read about in a magazine. But the girls loved it with an intensity that made Nathan think they might love it more than he'd loved anything at their age. And there was something about watching that love, pure, uncomplicated, absolute, that helped. They arrived just after 10. The morning was cool and flat, the sky still that same heavy gray. But the park had a few other families in it, some joggers, a man walking a large nervous dog, and an older couple sharing a bench near the pond. Mia immediately ran for the sandbox. Sophie followed more deliberately, pausing once to crouch down and examine something in the grass. A beetle, Nathan thought, or maybe a rock, before continuing. Lily stood next to Nathan for a moment. "Are you going to sit?" she asked. "Yes." "The bench by the path?" "Probably." She nodded like she was taking notes. Then she ran after her sisters. Nathan found the bench, wooden slats, a little damp from the morning, and sat down and pulled out his phone. He'd been staring at Marcus's email all morning, replying and deleting and replying again, unable to find words that said yes. I know how bad it is without sounding like a man who had stopped trying. He tried again now. "Marcus, I hear you. Let's talk Monday. I have the Oak Ridge presentation Thursday, and I need this week to..." He deleted it. Marcus, you're right. We need to talk. Can we do Tuesday? I'm trying to hold it together over here and deleted. He put the phone in his pocket. The park noise settled around him. The distant shouting of children, the creak of the climbing structure, the sound of pigeons negotiating about something near the trash cans. The bench was a little cold. The morning light was soft and gray and not unpleasant. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. Just a second. He didn't know how long he was out. It couldn't have been more than 15, 20 minutes. He'd had enough bad nights to know what real sleep felt like, and this wasn't that. This was the body making a decision without consulting the mind. One moment he was sitting upright with the park noise around him, and the next he was somewhere quieter and darker, and then he was back, blinking, disoriented. He looked toward the sandbox, his first instinct, always locate them, and felt the cold spike of alarm that every parent knows in their bones before logic catches up. The sandbox was empty. He was on his feet before he finished standing, which was a physical thing he would not have thought possible, and he turned in a full circle, scanning the park with the focused desperation of someone whose chest has stopped functioning properly. Then he heard Lily's voice, not scared, not hurt, very seriously explaining something to someone. He followed the sound. About 30 feet down the path, near one of the other benches, his 3 daughters stood in a neat, self-organized row in front of a woman he'd never seen before. They were facing her with the formal presentation posture they usually reserved for important announcements. Heels together, chins up, a collective seriousness that in any other context would have been funny. The woman was sitting on the bench, her posture very straight, wearing a dark overcoat that was a little too good for a Saturday morning at Crane Park. She had dark hair pulled back, and she was watching the 3 5-year-olds in front of her with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read from where he was standing. Something between amusement and bewilderment, with a small but visible fracture in the composure she was otherwise maintaining very carefully. As he got closer, he caught the tail end of what Lily was saying. And he makes really good pasta, and he doesn't yell even when the juice spills, and he's good at hugs when you actually want them, which is not all the time, but Lily. Nathan's voice came out with more air in it than he intended. All 4 heads turned toward him. Lily's expression was that of someone who has been interrupted in the middle of a very important task. Sophie looked caught, which meant she'd known exactly what was happening and had decided not to intervene. Mia, still wearing his sunglasses, which she'd apparently kept in her pocket the entire morning, regarded him with perfect calm from behind enormous lenses. "Daddy," Lily said, "this is the lady." "I can see there's a lady," Nathan said. He looked at the woman on the bench, and the words rearranged themselves. "I'm so sorry. I fell asleep on the bench, and whatever they were doing, I'm extremely sorry." The woman stood. She was taller than he'd registered from a distance, and she moved with the kind of deliberateness that comes from spending years in rooms where people watch you. Up close, the composure was more intact. The amusement was still there, but it had pulled back, tidied itself, settled into something more neutral. "It's fine," she said. Her voice was clear and controlled. They were very polite. "They were recruiting you for something," Nathan said. "I can tell by the formation." A small thing happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement that something had nearly been funny. "I wouldn't say recruiting," she said. "Daddy," Lily said loudly, the way she said things when adults were having conversations she felt were missing the point. "We gave her your phone number." The silence that followed was the kind that has a physical weight. Nathan looked at his daughter, then at the woman, then at his daughter again. I wrote it on the receipt," Lily continued helpfully. "From the coffee place. I found it in your jacket pocket." "We all agreed," Sophie added quietly, from the far end of the row. "It was a group decision," Mia confirmed. Nathan became aware that he was standing very still, like stillness might undo the last 45 seconds. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I am so sorry," he said to the woman. "You don't have to. Obviously, please, you can just—" "It's fine," she said again. There was something in the word this time, not dismissive, but considered, like she'd decided it and meant it. She looked down at the 3 girls, and the neutral expression shifted slightly, the same small fracture he'd noticed before. like something in the exact particular quality of their three identical faces had gotten through the composure without permission. "They're identical," she said. "Yes? All three?" "Yes." She looked up at him, and for a moment something went back and forth between them that Nathan could not have named. It lasted about 3 seconds. "I'm Isabella," she said. "Nathan." He extended his hand and she shook it with a grip that was brief and certain. "And these three are apparently my social coordinators." "We're good at it," Lily said. "You're not," Nathan said. "We got her to stay," Lily pointed out. Nathan had no answer for that. She left a few minutes later. She didn't make a production of it, said it was nice to meet them, said something brief and not unkind to each of the girls, and walked back up the path toward the park entrance with the same deliberateness she moved with generally. Nathan watched her go while actively telling himself not to watch her go, which was mostly unsuccessful. Lily appeared beside him. "She's nice," Lily said. "You don't know that. You talked to her for 5 minutes. We talked to her for 15 minutes while you were sleeping." "That's still—" She laughed at Mia's sunglasses joke. "Everyone laughs at Mia's sunglasses. They're my sunglasses." She laughed nicely, Lily said, with a precision that closed the argument. They stayed at the park another hour. Mia built something in the sandbox that she described as a city but more complicated. Sophie found the beetle she'd been looking for earlier, or possibly a different beetle, and spent 20 minutes observing it with great seriousness before letting it go. Lily did cartwheels until she was dizzy, and then lay in the grass looking at the sky. Nathan sat on the bench. He did not fall asleep. He did not take his phone out of his pocket. He stared at the path where the woman had walked away, and he thought about the expression on her face when she'd looked at his daughters, that small, unguarded fracture. And he thought that a person who looked like that at 3 5-year-olds in an October park was not quite the person their posture advertised. And then he told himself to stop thinking about it, because he had a Monday meeting with his accountant and a Thursday presentation and a firm that was 3 bad months from being a historical footnote, and he did not have the spare machinery for anything else. He walked his daughters home. He made lunch. He sat down with his drafting notes and the Oak Ridge proposal. He pushed the woman in the dark overcoat out of his mind with both hands. By evening, he'd almost managed it. The call came Tuesday. He was in the middle of revising the East Wing floor plan for the Oak Ridge Center, a section he'd already revised 4 times, but the proportions still weren't sitting right, and there was a quality issue with the natural light in the corridor that he hadn't resolved yet. The girls were in bed. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it got after 8 o'clock, that deep apartment quiet that was somehow louder than noise. His phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He'd been getting calls from a collection agency about a supply invoice from 8 months ago, and he wasn't in the emotional position to handle that conversation tonight. But something made him pick up. "Hello?" A pause. Brief. Like whoever was on the other end had prepared for this, and then, at the last moment, doubted the preparation. "Hi," a woman's voice, clear, with a careful quality to it. My name is Bella. I'm probably the last person you were expecting to hear from." Nathan put down his pencil. He didn't say anything for a moment. His brain was doing several things at once, processing the voice, the name, the pause, and the processing was going slower than it should have because one part of him had already arrived at a conclusion that the rest of him was still catching up to. "The park," he said. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. He was aware of a strange feeling in his chest. Not quite surprise, because some part of him had been waiting for this, though he hadn't known he'd been waiting. Not quite relief. Something between the two, occupying a territory that didn't have a name. "My daughters are going to be insufferable about this," he said. Another pause. Then the fracture again. This time in her voice, that same small break in the composure. Something leaking through it that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. "They made a good case," she said. "I know. They've been making cases since they could talk. The one in the sunglasses. Mia. She told me you make really good pasta." "I make decent pasta," he said. "Lily grades on a generous curve." There was a silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the pauses before. More settled. like both of them had reached the same point at the same time and were taking a breath before deciding what came next. "I don't usually do this," she said. Not apologetic, just accurate. "Do what?" "Call people." A beat. "Call strangers." "My daughter's cold called you on my behalf," Nathan said. "That's a different category than calling a stranger. That's generous. I'm choosing to frame it that way because the alternative is being mortified." This time it was a laugh. A real one. Short and a little surprised by itself, like it had slipped out before she'd had a chance to edit it. And Nathan, sitting at his drafting desk at 9:45 on a Tuesday night with the Oak Ridge floor plan half finished in front of him, felt something in his chest shift. Not dramatically. Not like a wave crashing. Like a window opening in a room that had been closed for a long time. Just a crack. Just enough for the air to change. "Coffee," he said. "That's the normal next step, right? If a person calls." "I suppose it is." "Thursday morning. There's a place on Balboa Street, the Anchor. They have good coffee and uncomfortable chairs, and they don't play music too loud." "That's a specific endorsement. I've been going there since my firm opened. The uncomfortable chairs keep the meetings short." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if I don't want the meeting to be short?" The window opened a little wider. "Then you can ignore the chairs," he said. "Thursday," she said. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. After she hung up, Nathan sat at his desk for a while without touching the floor plan. The apartment was still quiet. The radiator knocked twice and subsided. Somewhere down the hall, one of the girls shifted in her sleep. The particular soft sound of a small body turning over, the brief rustle of covers. He looked at the Oak Ridge plans. He picked up his pencil. But he was smiling when he did it, and the line between his eyebrows, the one Lily had pointed out, had smoothed itself out, at least for tonight. The Anchor was exactly as he'd described it. Small, dark-wooded, with mismatched chairs and the smell of good coffee ground fresh, and the kind of Saturday morning noise that was full without being loud. Nathan arrived 8 minutes early, which was a thing he did when he was nervous but wouldn't admit was about being nervous. He ordered coffee. He looked at his phone, he put his phone away. He looked at the door. She came in at 2 minutes past 10, and he recognized her before she saw him. The dark overcoat traded for a lighter jacket, the hair down this time, the same deliberate way of moving that he'd cataloged without meaning to from a park bench in October. She scanned the room with the same kind of thoroughness he'd noticed before, found him, and crossed the room without hesitation. "Nathan." "Bella." She sat across from him and ordered coffee. Black, no ceremony. And for a moment they just sat with the awkwardness of two adults who have ended up in a situation with very specific dimensions and no established script. "Your daughters," she said. "I know. The one in the middle, Sophie." She looked right at me when she gave me the paper, didn't say anything, just looked. She paused. Like she was deciding something. "She was," Nathan said. "She does that. She makes up her mind about people and then she acts on it. She decided she liked you. In 30 seconds. She's more reliable than 30 seconds suggests." Isabella wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. It was a small motion, unconscious, the kind of thing that speaks before the person means to. "I almost didn't call," she said. "What made you?" She considered this with a seriousness he was starting to recognize. Like she didn't answer questions before she'd actually thought about them, which in his experience was rarer than it should have been. "I kept the number in my coat pocket for 3 days, she said. "I took it out every night and told myself it was ridiculous. And then Thursday morning, I put it in my actual phone." "Why Thursday?" "I don't know." And that honesty, the flatness of it, the refusal to construct a prettier answer, did something to the conversation, opened it up, made it something other than performance. "My daughters put my phone number in your coat pocket," Nathan said, "and you kept it for 3 days before entering it into your phone. That is, objectively, a strange situation." "Yes." "Does it bother you?" She looked at him directly. "It would have a week ago." "And now?" "Now I'm drinking coffee on a Thursday morning instead of sitting in a meeting I was dreading." She said it simply, matter of fact, but he heard what was in it, not just the meeting avoided, but the dread itself, the weight of it, and the fact that this was lighter. He understood that. He understood it in a way that didn't require explanation. I have 3 daughters, he said, and a firm that's in trouble, and a proposal I need to win more than I've needed anything in years. My life is not simple or clean or organized. I wasn't looking for simple. Most people prefer it. I'm not most people, she said, without arrogance. Just a statement. He looked at her. She looked back. No, he said. I'm starting to think you're not. And they stayed at the Anchor for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The chairs were uncomfortable, and neither of them mentioned it. They talked about his daughters. Actually talked. Not the polite surface version, but the real one. The way Lily had recently decided she wanted to be an architect like him, but also a professional baker, and saw no reason these were incompatible goals. The way Sophie communicated in long silences followed by single sentences that somehow contained everything. The way Mia approached the world like it was a problem she'd been specifically assigned to solve and was making excellent progress on. She asked questions that were not the questions people usually asked. Not, how do you manage, which was asked with an admiration that always carried the faint shape of, I'm glad it isn't me, but specific questions. What did Lily mean when she said she wanted to be an architect baker? Did Sophie have a favorite book? What was the machine Mia was trying to build? He answered all of them. She told him she worked in real estate, that she spent most of her time in boardrooms and on conference calls and in rooms where the air was always slightly too cold because someone had decided that was professional. She said it with the precise, neutral tone of someone who had long ago accepted the terms of their own life, which made him watch her face instead of listening to the words, because the face said something different, not unhappy, exactly, but hollowed out in places, like she'd been somewhere for a long time that didn't require her to feel much. He didn't say this. He'd known her for 3 hours, and she had not asked for his assessment, but he filed it away in the part of his brain that was already, in spite of everything, paying careful attention. When they finally left, stepping out onto Balboa Street into the pale October afternoon, he said, "The pasta claim." She looked at him. "Lily's claim about the pasta. I feel like I'm on the record now, and I should address it directly." A slow smile. Not the small, controlled, almost smile from the park, but something bigger and less careful. "Are you inviting me to dinner?" "I'm giving you the opportunity to adjudicate a culinary dispute between me and a 5-year-old. That's a very legalistic way to extend an invitation. I went to a lot of school," he said. "It leaves marks." She laughed again. That same real laugh, quick and surprised by itself. "Saturday," she said. "I'll come Saturday." He watched her walk to a car at the curb, a dark car, well-maintained, driven by someone who got out of the driver's seat to open her door, which Nathan noted and filed away without assigning it too much weight. People had drivers. It happened. He walked back to his own car, which had a parking ticket on the windshield that he deserved. He sat behind the wheel for a moment. He thought about the way she'd said, "I wasn't looking for simple." The flatness of it, the honesty, the complete absence of performance. He started the car. 3 blocks later, he called Marcus back. "Monday," he said. "Let's do Monday. I have a presentation Thursday, and then I want to sort this out." There was a pause from Marcus's end. "You sound different." "I just had a very long coffee." "Nathan, Monday. I'll bring the files. We'll deal with it." A beat. "It's not over, Marcus. Okay? It's not over yet." He hung up. The city moved past the windows, shops and pedestrians, and the flat gray October sky already starting to purple toward evening. He thought about floor plans and pasta and a woman who kept a crumpled receipt in her coat pocket for 3 days before she decided what to do with it. He thought about a girl on a park bench in the middle of October, pressing a piece of paper into a stranger's hand. "Our daddy is lonely. Please call him." He hadn't been there to hear it, but he felt it. Somewhere in the vicinity of the hollow place in his own chest, he felt it. Saturday came with the specific nervous energy of a thing Nathan had been telling himself all week not to overthink, and had been overthinking constantly. He'd cleaned the apartment Thursday evening. Not the surface clean, so the real kind, where he got down on his knees and scrubbed the baseboards and sorted the stack of papers on the kitchen counter that had been accumulating since August, and finally fixed the cabinet door with the missing hinge, which took 11 minutes and made him feel both capable and slightly ridiculous for having left it for 8 months. The girls watched him with interest from the hallway. "Why are you cleaning the inside of the cabinet?" Mia asked. Because it needed cleaning. It never needed cleaning before. It always needed cleaning. I just did it now. She considered this with the focused suspicion of someone who doesn't accept weak arguments. Is it because of the lady? Nathan closed the cabinet door, opened it, closed it again. The hinge held. Her name is Bella. Is it because of Bella? Go get ready for bed. Mia retreated without conceding the point, which was her standard move, and Nathan stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the now clean cabinet as if it had said something he needed to respond to. He didn't answer the question, not out loud, but he reorganized the spice rack while he was at it, which told its own story. Saturday arrived gray and cool, which was October's default setting in San Francisco, and Nathan had the pasta sauce started by 11. A slow bolognese that needed at least 3 hours on low heat, which meant he'd started planning it Wednesday, which he was not going to examine too carefully. The girls were doing their respective things. Lily had set up an elaborate paper flower operation on the living room floor that had expanded to cover roughly 40% of the available surface area. Sophie was at the kitchen table with a library book about migratory birds, reading with the total absorption she brought to anything that genuinely interested her. And Mia was in the hallway building something she'd been building all week, which had so far incorporated a cardboard box, 6 toilet paper tubes, a rubber band, and a piece of string Nathan had no memory of owning. What does it do? He asked, stepping over it on his way to check the sauce. It will tell me when someone is coming down the hall, Mia said, adjusting the string. We don't need an alarm system. You don't know that. Nathan stirred the sauce and let it go. Isabella arrived at 6:15, 5 minutes later than she'd said, which he would later learn was her standard. Not dramatically late, but never the first one there. She was in jeans and a gray sweater that looked like it had been expensive once and had become comfortable through actual use rather than managed casualness. And she had a bottle of wine in one hand and what turned out to be a book about engineering for children in the other. He opened the door and she held up the book. I didn't know what to bring, she said. I asked someone at the bookstore. They said children like books about how things work. Did you tell them you were coming to see 5-year-old triplets? I said children. They made recommendations. So you bought an engineering textbook for kindergartners. It has pictures. A pause, and something slightly defensive moved through her expression. Not much, just a flicker. I don't have a lot of experience with... It's perfect, he said. Come in. And it was, in a specific way that he hadn't predicted. Mia took one look at the book, said, this is relevant to my current project, and appropriated it immediately. Isabella watched Mia carry it to the hallway and sit down cross-legged next to her construction, and Nathan watched Isabella watch Mia. That same small fracture in the composure, the unguarded thing leaking through. She's going to reference that to justify the alarm system, he said. The what? He showed her the hallway contraption. Isabella crouched down next to it, without hesitation, without the careful squat of someone trying not to wrinkle anything, and studied it with what appeared to be genuine interest. What triggers the alarm? Mia looked up from the book. She considered Isabella for a moment with that flat, evaluating stare. The string, she said. If someone steps on it, it pulls the tube, and the tube hits the box, and the box falls. What does falling do? It makes noise. Does it? It will, Mia said firmly. When I finish it. Isabella nodded seriously. You need a counterweight, she said, so the box falls faster. A silence. Then Mia said, where do I get a counterweight? Anything heavy enough, a handful of rocks, a full water bottle. Mia looked at Nathan. Do we have rocks? Not that I've cataloged, Nathan said. I'll find rocks tomorrow, Mia announced, and went back to the book. Nathan looked at Isabella, still crouched in his hallway, and she looked up at him with an expression that was very nearly a smile. I built a lot of things when I was small, she said quietly. Never had anyone help me figure out why they weren't working. He didn't say anything. He reached down and offered his hand to help her up, which was unnecessary because she was perfectly capable of standing on her own, and she took it anyway, which meant something he wasn't going to name right now. The sauce smells good, she said. Lily vouches for it. Then it's practically a professional recommendation. They went to the kitchen. Dinner was not a smooth, composed event. Lily knocked over a glass of water about 4 minutes in, not a dramatic knock, just the slow, inevitable tip of a glass that had been placed too close to an elbow. And Nathan cleaned it up while it was still spreading, and nobody made it a moment, which Isabella would later tell him was the thing that first made her feel like she could breathe in his apartment. Not the absence of the accident, the complete unremarkableness of it. Sophie asked Isabella carefully what she did for work. I work with buildings, Isabella said. Like Daddy. Similar. He designs them. She paused, and something in the pause was almost imperceptible. A very small hesitation that Nathan registered and would forget about by the time he went to bed. I work with the people who own them. That sounds boring, Lily said. Lily, Nathan said. It's okay, Isabella said. And then, honestly, it is sometimes. Lily seemed satisfied with that. She went back to her pasta. The conversation moved the way good dinner conversations move, some, not smoothly, but meaningfully. It ran aground and refloated, changed direction without warning, got interrupted by requests for more sauce and a debate about whether birds could recognize individual human faces that Sophie initiated and nobody could fully resolve. Isabella was not performing ease. She was working at it slightly, visibly, and Nathan found that more appealing than he'd expected. The effort itself, the fact that she cared enough to try. After dinner, while Nathan cleared the table, Sophie appeared at Isabella's elbow with the Migratory Birds book. Can you read? Sophie asked. Isabella looked at her. To you? Yes. A beat. Something moved across Isabella's face. Not quite a surprise, but the close cousin of it. Which part? Sophie opened to a page showing Arctic terns in flight, thousands of them, a photograph taken from above that made them look like snow moving sideways. This part, Sophie said. I've read it already, but it's better when someone reads it out loud. Isabella sat down on the couch, with Sophie tucked carefully against her side, the book open across both their laps, and she read about Arctic terns while Lily arranged paper flowers on the coffee table, and Mia tested counterweight concepts with a water bottle in the hallway, and Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway watching all of it. He stood there for a long time. He did not know, in that moment, how to describe what he was looking at. He wasn't sure domestic was the right word because it implied something comfortable and settled that hadn't had time to become either. It was something earlier than that, more tentative, like a photograph developing, the shapes emerging before the full image resolves. He turned back to the dishes. He was careful not to name it yet. The rest of October moved quickly, not in a blurred, summarizable way, but in the way time moves when the days are full enough that you stop watching the clock so closely, when there's enough happening in each hour that the hour doesn't drag. Isabella came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. It was never formally arranged, which was part of what made it feel real rather than constructed. There were no standing plans, no scheduled visits. She would text. Short messages, sparse, nothing in them that could be read too many ways. And he would respond. And somehow there she was, sitting on his couch with Sophie and the Arctic Terns book, or at the kitchen table helping Lily understand why paper flowers required a specific fold that Lily kept doing almost right, and that Isabella demonstrated 3 times with complete patience. Nathan watched her learn his daughters, and he watched his daughters allow themselves to be learned, which was not something they did with everyone. Lily had opinions about most adults, divided them quickly into interesting or not interesting, which was her primary taxonomy. Sophie's bar was different. She didn't require interesting, she required honest. And Mia simply tested people, all the time, in small ways, to see what they were made of. Isabella passed the test without knowing she was being tested. She disagreed with Lily once, plainly, about whether the paper flowers were better large or small. Lily argued for large. Isabella said small ones made a better cluster. They went back and forth with the straight-faced seriousness of 2 people who both thought they were right, and eventually Lily said, "Fine, we'll make both and see," which Nathan recognized as a Lily concession, which was the rarest thing she gave. She asked Sophie questions. Not to be nice. Real questions about the birds and the books and the particular way Sophie thought about things, and she listened to the answers with an attention that Sophie, who was not used to having her answers taken seriously by adults, found visibly disorienting and then visibly moved by. With Mia, she brought rocks. A small paper bag of smooth river rocks from a landscaping supply store, which she handed over on her 3rd visit without explanation. Mia opened the bag, looked inside, and said, "Counterweights," and that was the entire exchange. But Nathan caught the small, pleased thing that moved through Isabella's expression before she could put it away. He said nothing about it. He was getting good at saying nothing about things. What he allowed himself in the privacy of his own head was this. She was not what he'd expected. The woman on the park bench, composed, contained, moving through the park like someone passing through rather than arriving, had seemed like someone who kept everything at a distance. And she did keep things at a distance. He wasn't wrong about that, but the distance wasn't as complete as it looked. There were cracks in it, specific cracks, and through those cracks came something unguarded and real, and he needed a better word, hungry, almost. Not for things, for something less nameable, like a person who has eaten only one category of food their entire life and is standing in front of a completely different table. He recognized it because he'd felt the shape of it himself. He was careful not to push at the cracks. He had enough instinct left to know that the thing you push at cracks will close before you can get to what's inside. The third week of October, on a Wednesday evening when she'd come by without her usual text first, and he'd opened the door with his reading glasses still on and flour on his shirt from an ambitious attempt at homemade pizza that was going approximately as well as might be expected, she stood at his door and something was different. Not in a dramatic, visible way, more like a pressure differential, something behind the composure that was sitting heavier than usual. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. "You're always in the neighborhood." "I was passing by." He opened the door wider. "There's pizza, approximately. It's a philosophical pizza at this point, more a concept than a meal." She came in. The girls were already in bed. It was a Wednesday, school night, 8:30. The apartment was in its after-8 quiet. She sat at the kitchen table while he dealt with the dough situation, which was fighting him, and for a while she didn't say anything and he didn't ask. Eventually she said, "Do you ever have a day where everything works exactly the way it's supposed to, and somehow that's the thing that makes you feel worst?" Nathan set down the rolling pin. "Yes," he said. "Today was like that." "A good day at work?" "A very good day. Closed a major acquisition. Exactly what I'd been working toward for 6 months." She had her hands flat on the kitchen table, looking at them. "I called my assistant to share the news, and he congratulated me, and then I sat in my office for 20 minutes and couldn't think of a single other person to call." The kitchen was quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be, it's just—" She stopped, started again. "I'm very good at what I do. I've been very good at it for a long time. And somewhere along the way, I think I built a life that fits the career and left out most of the rest." Nathan looked at her hands flat on his kitchen table, at the careful stillness of her posture. "You called me," he said quietly. She looked up. "I didn't call. I came by." Same thing. Something shifted in her face. Not the fracture this time, something more deliberate, like she'd decided to let a particular thing be true. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it is." He went back to the pizza. She stayed at the table and talked while he worked. About the acquisition, about the office, about her Uncle Richard, who sat on the board, and who she mentioned in a way that was very neutral on the surface and underneath was not neutral at all. Nathan didn't push at that either. He filed it. The pizza came out lopsided and slightly overdone on one side, and they ate it at the kitchen table at 9:15, and it was genuinely, honestly pretty good, and she said so with an expression that was the specific expression of someone being surprised by pleasure. "I told you the pasta was good," he said. "This isn't pasta." The principle transfers. She laughed, pulled off a piece that was definitely overdone, and ate it anyway. "Are you always like this?" "Like what?" "Like—" She gestured vaguely, which, from someone who was usually very precise, was itself expressive. "Like this. Cooking things at 9 o'clock, fixing cabinets, reading engineering books, making things work." "I have 3 kids," he said. "You make things work or you fall apart, and I chose not to fall apart." She was quiet for a moment. "When did you lose her?" "Their mother." The question landed clean and direct, no hedging around the edges, which he appreciated. 2 years ago January, he said, cardiac event. She was 29. He said it with the flatness of someone who has said a thing enough times that the words no longer go jagged on the way out, but still holds the space around the words very still. I'm sorry. I know. A beat. The girls don't remember her much. Lily remembers her smell. She says, Sophie found a video on my phone, a short one, less than a minute. She's watched it enough times that she's memorized it. Mia almost never mentions her, which is how Mia handles things that are too large. Isabella did not say anything. She didn't try to fill the space, which was the right choice, and Nathan noticed. You learn to carry it differently, he said. Not lighter, just differently, like rearranging furniture so you can still get through the room. She looked at him. Her expression had something raw in it now. Not for herself, he thought. For him. For the information itself. I've never had to carry anything like that, she said. You'll have other things. I know. That's not a comfort. I'm not trying to comfort you. I know, she said again. It's more honest. They finished the pizza. He made tea. She didn't usually drink tea, she told him, but she accepted the mug anyway and held it the same way she held coffee, both hands close to her chest. He thought about asking what it was about holding something warm, but it felt like a question she wasn't quite ready for. She left at 11. He walked her to the door. In the doorway, she stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at him, and Nathan, who had been carefully, deliberately not pushing at cracks, said nothing. He let the moment be exactly what it was. Saturday? She said. Saturday, he said. She left. He closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment in the apartment quiet. From the girls' room, no sound, just breathing. He went back to the kitchen and washed the pizza pan and the mugs, and thought about nothing in particular, which was to say he thought about her because thinking about nothing in particular had become, without his noticing, thinking about her. November came. The Oak Ridge proposal occupied his mornings, and the worrying about the Oak Ridge proposal occupied his evenings, and in the spaces between he was working to keep Cole Architecture from going under by taking on anything that came in, a commercial renovation in the Richmond district, a residential addition in the Sunset, jobs that paid but didn't mean the same thing, jobs that were about survival rather than the kind of work that reminded him why he'd become an architect in the first place. Marcus had given him a frank timeline at the Monday meeting in late October. If the Oak Ridge bid fell through, they were looking at closing before spring. He didn't tell Isabella this. He didn't hide it exactly. If she'd asked directly, he would have told her. But she didn't ask, and he didn't volunteer because there was a part of him that wanted one thing in his life to not be about the precariousness of the rest of it. When she was in his apartment, or when they walked in the park after dropping the girls at school, which had become a Wednesday morning habit, informal, never discussed as a habit, the weight was still there, but he wasn't carrying it forward constantly. He could set it down for a few hours. He was aware this was its own kind of complicated, but he let himself have it. Isabella, for her part, was still Bella. Still the woman from the park, the woman at the kitchen table, the woman who brought river rocks and read bird books out loud. She talked about real estate in general terms, markets, development patterns, the tension between investment and community impact, which she seemed genuinely conflicted about in ways she didn't always fully articulate. She talked about her parents, who were retired and lived in Marine and had wanted her to do something different with her life without ever being specific about what exactly that something should have been. She talked about the years she'd spent building her career, the single-mindedness of it, the trade-offs she'd made without always recognizing them as trade-offs at the time. She did not talk about her company's name. She did not talk about scale, the actual scale, the board meetings, and the global portfolio and the name that appeared on development projects all over the West Coast. Nathan did not know, because he did not know what to look for. He was not in her world. His world was Clement Street and Crane Park, and the back table at the Anchor, and 3 daughters who were conducting what he was increasingly convinced was a coordinated long-term strategy. He did not follow real estate news. He did not know the major players in the city's development sector with any depth beyond what touched his own work. And so when she said, "I work with the people who own buildings," he took it at face value. A businesswoman. Smart, well-compensated, probably mid-level management of something, private about work in the way some people are private about work, leaving it at the office, which he respected. He told himself this and believed it, and went to bed those nights not knowing that the thing he was not examining would eventually break everything open. The first week of November, the girls got a cold. Not a dramatic cold, just the low-grade, relentless kind that circulates through school in the fall. The runny noses and slightly elevated temperatures and general miserable quality that doesn't cross into sick enough to be scary but goes on long enough to be exhausting. All three at once, which was the triplet tax. When illness arrived, it went through all three in sequence or, as was the case this time, simultaneously. Nathan had been up 2 nights running. He was on the couch at midnight on a Thursday with Sophie on one side, her temperature down from its earlier high but her body still radiating heat the way small sick bodies do, and Lily on his lap in that fully collapsed way she had when she wasn't feeling well, all her normal structure dissolved, just weight and warmth against his chest. Mia was asleep in the bedroom, her cold the mildest of the three, and she'd gone down at 10 and not moved since. His phone lit up on the cushion beside him. A text. Still awake? He looked at the time. 12:14. Barely, he typed back. Girls okay? He'd texted her earlier to cancel their Wednesday walk, explaining about the sick triplets. Getting there, he wrote. Sophie's temperature came down. Lily's running out of energy to be miserable about it, which means she's improving. A pause. Then, can I bring anything tomorrow? He almost said no. The reflex of it, I'm fine, we're managing, don't worry, was right there at his fingertips, worn into his muscle memory from 2 years of mostly being fine and managing and handling it because there was no alternative. He didn't type it. Instead, he wrote, soup, if you have time. The kind from the deli on California, the chicken rice. They like that one. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I'll be there at noon. She was there at 11:50. She came with soup, a large container of the chicken rice from the California Street Deli, which meant she'd looked up the deli, found the right one, gotten there early enough that the soup was ready when she arrived at his door. She also had a bag from the pharmacy, Children's Fever Reducer, the right one, the dye-free version that was easier on small stomachs, along with 3 sets of the kind of cold packs that could go in a freezer and be placed on foreheads, which Nathan had been making do without by wrapping ice in a dish towel like it was 1987. He let her in and looked at the pharmacy bag. I Googled what helps, she said with the matter-of-fact honesty that was one of her most consistent qualities. I don't have experience with sick kids. I followed the list. This is better than what I had. The bar was apparently ice in a dish towel. He laughed, surprised. How did you... Oh, you texted me a photo of Sophie at midnight. There was a dish towel on her forehead in the background. He had no memory of sending that photo. He must have done it on autopilot, the way you do things at midnight when you're operating on fragments of sleep. The idea of it, the unconscious reaching out, the photo sent without thought, was something he needed to sit with later when he had a moment that wasn't in front of her. Isabella stayed 4 hours. She sat on the couch with Sophie and read the Arctic Terns book again. Sophie's request, always the terns when she was feeling bad. Like the birds going back and forth across the whole planet was something steady to hold on to. She brought Lily soup and sat with her while she ate it, tolerating Lily's sick day conversational mode, which was a version of Lily's regular conversational mode, but more repetitive and slightly more aggrieved. She checked on Mia, who was awake by afternoon and alert enough to want to discuss the counterweight problem, despite having a runny nose and looking like she'd been laundered wrong. And Nathan slept. Not for long. 2 hours, maybe less, on the edge of his bed, with the door cracked open, able to hear the apartment sounds without the specific sharpness of listening for crisis. Just sleep. The ordinary kind. When he woke up and came back to the living room, the apartment was quiet, in the careful way of someone who has been deliberately keeping it quiet. The soup had been cleaned up. The girls were dozing, all 3, improbably, at the same time. Sophie and Lily were on the couch with a blanket spread across both of them that Nathan did not own and had not seen before, which meant she'd brought it in the bag he hadn't fully examined. And Mia was on the floor on her playmat, curled up with the engineering book, asleep on top of it. Isabella was in the kitchen washing bowls. She heard him in the doorway and turned. You didn't have to do any of this, he said. His voice came out rough from sleep. I know. You have work. I cleared my afternoon. He looked at her, at the careful, composed posture that was not quite as composed as usual, slightly loosened by 4 hours in a sick apartment with 3 5-year-olds. Her hair a little less precise, a damp spot on her sweater sleeve from the soup bowl, a quality about her that was less assembled than he usually saw. She looked, he thought, more like herself. "Thank you," he said. She turned back to the sink. "The blanket is from the bag. I figured it might help." It did. Good. He crossed to the kitchen and stood next to her and picked up the dish towel and started drying the bowls she'd washed. She didn't say anything about it. They worked through the small stacks side by side, and the apartment was quiet around them with 3 sleeping children and the sound of the afternoon outside. And Nathan thought about 2 people in a kitchen doing ordinary things, and how he hadn't known how much he missed ordinary things until the ordinary things came back. He finished drying the last bowl. He set it on the counter. He said, without thinking about whether to say it, "I think I'm falling for you." The water ran for a moment more. Then she turned it off. The kitchen was very quiet. "Nathan, you don't have to say anything," he said. I'm not asking you to match it. I just wanted to say it once out loud instead of carrying it around." She turned to face him. Her expression was the one he'd seen in the park that first day. The composure, the containment. But something different sat inside it now. Something that was doing what it always did, trying to get through. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I want you to know that. I have been very bad at most of the things that matter for a very long time." "I know." "You don't, actually." There was something in that, a weight behind it, specific and deliberate, that landed somewhere in the back of his mind. Not an alarm exactly, more like a question mark, placed and left. "Then tell me," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. In the living room, one of the girls shifted in her sleep. A small sound, a blanket rustling. "Not today," Isabella said. "The girls are sleeping and you haven't slept enough, and today is—" She stopped, looked at her hands. "Today is already a lot." "Okay," he said, "but I want to." She said it like a commitment, and he heard it that way. "I want to tell you. There are things I should have—" Another stop. "Soon." He nodded. He did not push. She stayed another hour. She left at 5 when Nathan's neighbor, Mrs. Papadakis from 4B, knocked on the door with a tin of cookies for the sick girls and immediately embarked on a 20-minute assessment of their conditions that was both unsolicited and surprisingly accurate. Isabella slipped out during the medical consultation, squeezing Nathan's arm once as she passed him in the doorway, a brief, certain pressure, lasting maybe 2 seconds. And then she was gone. He thought about those 2 words for days afterward. Not today. Which meant there was something. Which meant she knew it. Which meant the question mark sitting in the back of his mind had a shape, even if it didn't have edges yet. He went back to the Oak Ridge proposal. He revised the east wing for the 5th time. He got the light in the corridor right, finally. A clerestory window he'd been circling for weeks, suddenly landing in exactly the right position, the proportions resolving the way they sometimes did after enough time looking at a problem from the wrong angle. He stayed up until 1 in the morning drawing it out, and when he finally set down his pencil, the proposal felt finished in a way it hadn't before. Complete. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Oak Ridge, the neighborhood, the community, the families who'd been there for generations, and the small businesses and the school 2 blocks from the proposed site where kids walked past an empty lot every day. He thought about what it would mean to build something real there. He thought about the Thursday meeting. And underneath all of it, quiet and persistent, he thought about 2 words in his kitchen, "not today," and the very specific weight of a thing that hasn't been said yet. The Thursday meeting was at the Civic Center Auditorium, a room that seated 400 people and typically held planning hearings attended by 40. Nathan had been to enough of these to know the format. A moderator, a panel of city officials, a presentation from each bidding party, and then a period of public comment that almost never changed anything but existed so everyone could say there had been a process. He arrived 30 minutes early. He had his presentation materials in a cardboard portfolio under his arm, printed boards, 3 of them, plus the bound proposal package, plus a USB drive as backup, because he'd learned from the Millbrook project 2 years ago that having only one format was optimism dressed as preparation. He was wearing the gray jacket he wore to client meetings, which needed dry cleaning and hadn't gotten it, and he'd fixed the collar twice in the car already. The auditorium was filling slowly when he came in. He recognized a few faces. Two other architecture firms had submitted competing proposals, and he could see representatives from both setting up at the front tables. There were community members arriving in clusters, older residents mostly. People who'd been coming to these meetings for years because Oak Ridge was their neighborhood, and they had learned the hard way that showing up was the only reliable defense against not being heard. Nathan sat up at his assigned table. He laid out his boards. He looked at the room. He thought about the corridor, the clerestory window, the way the light would fall in the late afternoon through the east wing and reach the community room floor. He'd drawn it so many times now that he could see it when he closed his eyes. Not as a drawing, but as a place, actual and real, somewhere that didn't exist yet but would. He opened his proposal packet and reviewed it one more time, even though he'd reviewed it enough times that reviewing it again was a form of anxiety management rather than preparation. The room filled. The moderator, a city official named Brennan, who Nathan had dealt with before and found neither helpful nor obstructive, simply procedural, took the podium and called for order. The other firms presented first. The first one had a large display and a lot of very impressive renderings, and a proposal that, in Nathan's professional opinion, was beautiful and completely indifferent to the actual people who would use the building. The second firm's presentation was more functional, but the budget projection was visibly unrealistic, the kind of number that sounded good at a public meeting and fell apart in the first contractor conversation. Nathan presented third. He stood at the front and talked about the east wing and the light and the community room floor. He talked about the families 2 blocks from the site. He talked about what a building is actually for. Not the aesthetic, not the investment case, but the Tuesday afternoons inside it, the kids doing homework at the tables, the community meetings, the ordinary, irreplaceable use of a place that belongs to the people who need it. He'd given a version of this presentation in his apartment at 10 o'clock at night with Mia's water bottle counterweight on the kitchen table, and he knew every line of it. When he finished, there was a pause, and then the community members in the audience started clapping, which didn't happen at planning meetings, which told him something about how the evening was going. He sat back down at his table. He felt, for the first time in months, like something was going to work. Then the moderator introduced the next item on the agenda. We'll now hear from the corporate development presentation regarding the Oak Ridge District acquisition proposal. Representing Hart Development Group, CEO Isabella Hart. The name landed in his chest before his brain processed it. He heard the sound of heels on the auditorium floor. He heard the microphone adjust. He heard the room shift in the specific way it shifts when someone with a certain kind of authority takes a stage. He looked up. She was wearing a dark blazer over a white shirt, her hair back the way it had been in the park that first day. And she was walking to the podium with the deliberateness he knew from 100 smaller contexts, his apartment doorway, his kitchen, the path at Crane Park. But here it occupied the entire room. Her face was composed in the specific way he'd seen it composed when she was in her own territory, not the Isabella of the kitchen table, not the woman who'd read about Arctic terns, not the person who'd brought river rocks in a paper bag. This was someone he had not met. And on the screen behind her, as she opened her folder at the podium, the logo appeared, a stylized H over a skyline, clean corporate lines, and below it the words Hart Development Group, Oak Ridge District Comprehensive Redevelopment Proposal. The room behind Nathan buzzed with the sound of community members reacting to slide renderings that showed glass towers and retail corridors replacing the low-rise blocks of their neighborhood. Nathan sat very still. He was doing the math. Isabella Hart, Hart Development Group, the acquisition, the comprehensive redevelopment proposal. The months of careful, not quite questions about his work, the neutrality when she mentioned real estate, the I work with the people who own buildings, the specific things she hadn't said, not today. He thought about those words now with a completely different understanding of what they'd meant. She was at the podium. She had begun speaking. He could hear her voice. The clear, controlled voice he knew, doing what he now understood it was trained to do, presenting a development plan to a room of 400 people with the fluency of someone who had done this 10, 20, 100 times. The community center in her proposal was incidental, a small footnote in a much larger plan, amenity appended to make the project look community-friendly, the kind of gesture a legal team recommends to smooth the public process. His community center? His proposal. His east wing with the clerestory and the light on the floor. It would not exist in the world she was describing. The neighborhood where it was supposed to stand would not exist. In its place would be a development project with a different name and a different math, the kind that made very good sense on an investment spreadsheet and very little sense to the families who'd been there for 3 generations. He stood up, not dramatically. He didn't make a scene. He picked up his portfolio and his proposal packet, and he walked out of the auditorium through the side door while Isabella was still at the podium, while her voice was still carrying over the room, and he pushed through the exterior door into the cold November evening without turning around. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Civic Center. The night air was cold and flat. He stood there. He didn't know how long. A few people came out of the building behind him. Community members stepping into the hallway during the Q&A portion, talking in low, urgent voices about what the renderings meant for their street, their block, their neighborhood. He moved away from the door and stood in the darker part of the sidewalk where the streetlight didn't quite reach, and he tried to assemble his thoughts into something that had a shape. The shape kept coming out wrong. He called Marcus. 3 rings, 4. Voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message. He thought about the kitchen. The soup during the girl's cold. The way she'd turned off the water and stood very still when he said, "I think I'm falling for you." The "not today" and the "I want to tell you" and the "there are things I should have." He thought about how she'd looked at his daughters. He thought about the engineering book and the river rocks and Sophie asleep against her side. He thought about all of it sitting next to what he'd just seen, and he couldn't make the geometry work. Couldn't find the shape that held both things at once without one of them destroying the other. He walked to his car. He sat behind the wheel. He drove home. He paid the babysitter, Renata, a grad student from 2 floors up, who watched the girls on evenings he had meetings, who took her money and her textbook and left with the particular sensitivity of someone who reads a room correctly and decides not to ask. He checked on the girls. All 3 asleep. He stood in the doorway of their room for a longer time than usual. Then he went to the kitchen and sat at the table and stared at the surface of it, which he'd wiped down that morning and which had a small stain near the edge from a craft project that hadn't fully come out. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. 7 texts from an unknown number. No, not unknown. A number he knew. The same number that had texted him about soup, about Wednesday walks, about counterweights, and river rocks, and whether he was still awake. He looked at the messages without opening them. The preview of the first one showed, "Nathan, I need you to let me explain." He put the phone face down on the table. He sat with it face down for 20 minutes. Then he turned it over and read the messages. The first, "Nathan, I need you to let me explain." The second, "I saw you leave. Please don't." The third, "I know what that looked like. I know, but please." The fourth, "I was going to tell you. I was. I didn't know how to, and I kept waiting for the right time, and there wasn't a right time, and I made the wrong choice, and I know that." The fifth was just his name, Nathan. The sixth, the girls. "Tell them I..." And then it stopped mid-sentence like she'd started it and then didn't know how to finish it. The seventh, "I'm outside." He looked at that last one. The timestamp was 4 minutes ago. He got up from the kitchen table and went to the window and looked down at the street. There was a dark car at the curb that he recognized, and standing next to it, not quite under the streetlight, was Isabella in her dark blazer, her arms crossed over her chest against the cold, looking up at his building with the expression of someone who has no good options left and knows it. He stood at the window and looked at her. She didn't see him. She was looking at the building's front door, or possibly at nothing at all, just standing in the cold trying to decide something. He watched her for a moment. He stepped back from the window. He did not go downstairs. He sat back down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands and stayed there until the sound of a car pulling away from the curb came up through the window glass. And then there was just the street again, and the kitchen, and the stain on the table that hadn't quite come out. He didn't sleep that night. He sat with the Oak Ridge proposal on the table in front of him and didn't touch it, and he thought about the 4 months it had taken to build and the 1 hour it had taken to come apart. And he thought about his firm and the timeline Marcus had given him. And he thought about a woman at a podium and a woman on a sidewalk, and whether those were the same person or 2 completely different people who happened to use the same face. By 3 in the morning, he had not resolved this question. By 5, when the sky outside started its reluctant graying, he'd stopped trying. He made coffee. He woke the girls. He took Mia to school because she had a presentation in class. About machines, of course, a presentation she'd been preparing for a week. And he sat in the back of the classroom with 7 other parents and watched his daughter stand at the front of the room in her striped leggings and explain, with complete confidence, how a counterweight makes a system more efficient. And he clapped when the teacher asked the parents to clap. And in the car on the way home, Mia said, "Are you sad?" "I'm tired," he said. "Those are different." "I know." She looked out the window. "Is it about Bella?" He kept his eyes on the road. "What makes you ask that?" "Sophie said she might go away." "When did Sophie say that?" "Before school. She said she felt like something was wrong." A pause. "Sophie feels things before they happen sometimes." Nathan drove. "Is she going away?" Mia asked. "I don't know," he said. And because Mia was 5 years old and didn't deserve a clean lie, even when it would have been easier, something happened. Did she do something bad? He thought about this, really thought about it, the way it deserved. "She didn't tell me something she should have told me," he said. Mia was quiet for a while. They pulled onto Clement Street. He found a parking spot, which was the daily small miracle of living on Clement Street, and he turned off the engine. "Did she know she should tell you?" Mia asked. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the steady, wide seriousness of her face. "Yes," he said. "She knew." Mia nodded slowly, processing this. Then, "Is that worse than not knowing?" He didn't have a good answer for that either. He went back to the apartment and tried to work, and could not work. He opened the proposal and stared at the East Wing floor plan, and saw not the corridor but the auditorium, the logo on the screen, the word comprehensive over a rendering of glass towers where a neighborhood used to be. He tried to separate the professional from the personal and found they were fused in a way that didn't allow the operation. Marcus called at noon. Nathan answered. "I heard about last night," Marcus said. He had a careful tone, the tone he used when he was delivering information he'd arranged into the least destructive possible order. "I made some calls this morning. The Hart Group's Oak Ridge proposal." "I know about the Hart Group," Nathan said. "Is substantial. It's a full district acquisition, residential, commercial, the works. The community center in their plan is, I know." "Nathan." A pause. "It's bad. The city council has been in talks with Hart Development for months. Longer, maybe. Our proposal was never—" He stopped. "Say it." "Our proposal was never in a position to compete with what they're offering. The acquisition value alone is—" "Then what was the point of the open process, the public meeting? The process is real. The outcome was probably already written." Marcus said it with the flat honesty of someone who has survived long enough in a business to stop pretending otherwise. "I'm sorry. I should have dug deeper into who else was in the running." Nathan looked at the floor plan. "How long do we have?" he said. "If Oak Ridge falls through officially, you need another anchor project by February, or we're having a different conversation." "February." "I'm sorry." Nathan hung up. He sat with that for a while. "February. The corridor with the light. The family's 2 blocks from the empty lot." He thought about all of it with the specific, exhausted clarity of someone who has slept 3 hours and has nothing left to spend on managing his own reactions. His phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from an unsaved number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, my name is Daniel Marsh. I'm a journalist with the Bay Area Courier. I'm writing a piece on the Oak Ridge development, and I have some information about Hart Development Group that I believe you'd want to know. Would you be willing to speak with me today?" Nathan read it twice. He almost deleted it. Instead, he wrote back, "What kind of information?" The response came in under a minute, the kind that explains why the public process was never going to go the way the public thought it was. "I'd rather speak in person." He arranged to meet Marsh at the Anchor at 2 o'clock, not because he was certain it would matter, but because sitting in the apartment staring at the floor plan was not going to help anyone. The journalist was younger than his byline suggested, early 30s, a small man with alert eyes and the slightly worn look of someone who survives on coffee and specific purpose. He was already at a table when Nathan arrived, with a closed laptop and a recorder, which he placed on the table between them and looked at Nathan for permission before turning on. Nathan nodded. "I'll be direct," Marsh said. I've been investigating Hart Development Group for about 3 months. The Oak Ridge deal specifically, but also some of their other recent acquisitions. There's a pattern. He opened his laptop. Have you heard of Richard Thorne? Nathan hadn't. He's Isabella Hart's uncle. He sits on the Hart Group board as a senior development officer. He's been with the company since before Isabella Hart took over as CEO. He was acting CEO during the transition period after her father stepped down. Marsh turned the laptop to face Nathan. There was a document on the screen, dense with figures. Over the last 18 months, Thorne has been routing acquisition proposals through a series of subsidiary companies in ways that appear to benefit his personal investment portfolio. The Oak Ridge deal specifically, how does this connect to the public process? The community meeting last night, the bids, the presentation, the panel? Marsh leaned forward. Thorne's office contacted the city planning department in July, 4 months before the public meeting was announced. He had preliminary agreements in place before a single competing firm knew the opportunity existed. Nathan looked at the document. That's corruption, he said. That's what I'm reporting, yes. Marsh sat back. But here's what makes it interesting from your angle, Mr. Cole. My source inside Hart Development tells me that Isabella Hart herself doesn't know the full extent of what Thorne arranged, that the deal was structured specifically to root around her oversight. Nathan was quiet. She didn't know, he said. Not the Thorne angle. She knew about Oak Ridge. She's been running the public-facing side of it. But the preliminary agreements, the payments, the city contact in July, my source says Thorne kept her out of it deliberately. Nathan stared at the document without seeing it. He thought about a woman at a podium in a dark blazer. He thought about I work with the people who own buildings. He thought about all the things she hadn't said, and he tried to draw a line between the things she'd hidden intentionally and the things she hadn't known were hidden. The line was not clean. It was never going to be clean. But it was not the same line he'd drawn the night before. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because you were the most credible competing proposal at that meeting last night, and because my piece needs a community impact angle, and because... Marsh paused, chose his words. Because my source tells me something else. That Thorne's real goal with Oak Ridge isn't just the development profit. He's been building a case to the board that Isabella Hart's leadership has been too slow, too community-focused, not aggressive enough on acquisitions. Oak Ridge is his proof of concept. If it succeeds on his terms, he uses it to push her out. Nathan looked at him. He's using the deal to remove her, Marsh said. The anchor buzzed around them. The early afternoon coffee crowd, a laptop worker in the corner, the counter staff exchanging something about a delivery order. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary afternoon in a city where, apparently, the ground had been moving under a neighborhood's feet for 4 months without anyone who lived there knowing it. What does she know? Nathan said. Right now. As of today. I don't know exactly. My source says she's been asking questions internally since last week. Something may have surfaced. Marsh closed his laptop. Mr. Cole, whatever your personal situation is with Ms. Hart, and my source suggests there may be one, your source is well informed. The professional situation here is separate. You have standing as a competing bidder to contest the process publicly. My piece runs in 3 days. It would be stronger with your statement on record. Nathan sat with the coffee he'd ordered and not touched. He thought about Mia in the classroom that morning, explaining counterweights with the certainty of someone who understands exactly how a system works. He thought about Sophie on the couch, reading about birds that travel the whole planet and come back. He thought about Lily's paper flowers, the argument about large versus small, the concession he'd recognized as rare. He thought about February. He thought about the corridor with the light. Give me until tomorrow, he said. Marsh gave him until tomorrow. Nathan walked back to his car in the cold November afternoon and sat behind the wheel without starting it. He thought about the text messages sitting on his phone, the ones he'd read the night before. I know what that looked like. I know. The 6th one that had stopped mid-sentence. The girls, tell them I... He took his phone out. He stared at the screen. He typed, I need to know what you knew and when. Not for me. Because it changes what I do next. And it matters. He waited. 3 minutes. 5. 8. Then, I'll tell you everything. All of it. But not by text. Can we meet? He thought about the auditorium. He thought about Marcia's document and the preliminary agreements from July. He thought about Richard Thorne and the board and the case being built to remove her with a neighborhood as the proof of concept. He thought about the question Mia had asked in the car. Is that worse than not knowing? He typed back, tomorrow morning, Crane Park, 8 o'clock. There was a pause, then, I'll be there. He started the car. He drove home. The girls were back from school when he got in. Mrs. Papadakis from 4B had been collecting them in the afternoons this week, an arrangement she'd insisted on and he'd been too tired to argue against. They were at the kitchen table with snacks and varying degrees of post-school energy. Lily was drawing, Sophie was reading. Mia was explaining something to Mrs. Papadakis with the aid of a diagram she'd drawn on a piece of paper, which Mrs. is. Papadakis was studying with the polite bafflement of someone presented with a technical document in a foreign language. Nathan put his things down. Lily looked up from her drawing. You have the line, she said. I know. Worse than before. I know, Lily. She looked at him for another moment, that same disconcerting reading the fine print look. Then she held up her drawing. It was a paper flower. No, not a drawing of one. An actual paper flower, folded with a long stem made from a twisted piece of green paper. Small, not large. The kind Isabella had argued for. I made it her way, Lily said. It is better. Nathan took the flower. He held it for a moment. He set it on the counter where he could see it, and he thanked Mrs. Papadakis, and he started dinner. And all through the preparation and the eating and the bedtime routine, he carried the weight of what he knew and what he didn't know, and what tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock might cost him. He had been careful with himself for 2 years, careful not to ask for things he wasn't sure were available, careful not to need things he couldn't reliably get, careful not to let the hollow place in his chest become a direction he walked toward without checking the ground first. But he had let himself walk. He'd done it knowing it could go wrong, because all the things worth doing can go wrong, and at some point caution is just fear with better posture. He checked on the girls before he went to bed. 3 small sets of lungs, breathing. On the kitchen counter, a small paper flower. Small, not large, the right kind for a cluster. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but he had not expected to. Crane Park at 8 in the morning was a different place than it was at 10. The light was lower and grayer, the trees stripped further into November than they'd been in October, and the benches were wet from an overnight drizzle that had stopped some time before dawn without quite drying up. A woman with a stroller moved along the far path. 2 joggers passed the duck pond. Otherwise, Nathan had the main path to himself. He sat on the same bench. Not intentionally. He'd come from the Clement Street side, taken the main path, and sat down at the first available bench without thinking about which one. It took him a moment, sitting there with his coffee cup, to realize it was the same bench he'd fallen asleep on in October. Same wooden slats. Same slight damp. He'd been sitting there for 6 minutes when he heard footsteps on the path. Isabella looked like she hadn't slept either. She was in a dark coat, not the overcoat from that first day, but something heavier, functional rather than composed. And her hair was down in a way that suggested she hadn't had the energy to do anything with it, rather than a deliberate choice. She walked toward him with the deliberateness he knew, but without its usual assurance, like the machinery was running on something other than its normal fuel. She stopped in front of the bench. He didn't say anything. She sat down beside him, not close, leaving a foot of space between them that felt like more than a foot. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A jogger went past. A pigeon negotiated the path in front of them with the unconcerned arrogance of city pigeons everywhere. Then Isabella said, I'm going to tell you everything, all of it, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything, because if I stop, I'm not sure I'll get back to it. Nathan looked at his coffee. Okay, she told him. She started with her father, Gerald Hart, who'd built the development company from a 2-person office in the early 90s into a mid-sized regional firm, who had groomed Isabella from her early 20s to take over, who had stepped down 6 years ago when his health declined and handed her the chair with the absolute confidence of a man who has built something and knows exactly who should carry it forward. She'd been 24 when she first joined the company in a junior capacity. She'd worked every tier of it before she was 30. When she took the CEO chair, she knew every part of the operation from the ground up. What she hadn't fully understood, she said, was Richard Thorne, her father's younger brother. A man who'd been present in the company's orbit as long as she could remember, always in some senior capacity, always positioned slightly sideways to her father's authority. Not competing, exactly, but not fully subordinate either. He was charming in the way that people who are very good at being charming are charming. Specifically, differently, to each person, in a way that's difficult to see clearly until you're looking back at it from a distance. When Dad stepped down, the board made him Senior Development Officer, Isabella said. It was supposed to be a legacy title, something to honor his years with the company. She paused. I accepted it without... I should have pushed back. I was 29 and I'd just become CEO of a company with 400 employees, and I was managing 18 things at once, and I told myself Richard was manageable, that I had enough oversight on him. Did you? For a while. Her hands were in her coat pockets. She was looking straight ahead. He ran development proposals the way he'd always run them, aggressively, quickly, with a financial model that prioritized acquisition value over everything else. It wasn't how I wanted to grow the company, but he had board relationships I hadn't fully built yet, and the proposals were legal, and I was picking my battles. Oak Ridge, Nathan said. I knew about Oak Ridge from July. We had a proposal in development, internal early stage. I knew Richard was driving it. I didn't know... She stopped, reassembled. I didn't know that in July he had already reached out to city planning directly, that he had people there who owed him things, that he'd been building that relationship for 2 years specifically for acquisitions like this one. I didn't know that the public competitive process was being designed around an outcome that had already been decided. He told you it was a legitimate bid. He presented it to me as a legitimate bid with a strong competitive position, which was technically true that we did have a strong position. He just didn't mention that he'd built the position by corrupting the process on the front end. She said it flatly. Not in a self-exculpatory way. In the way of someone reading an inventory they've taken of themselves and not softening the numbers. Nathan was quiet. When did you find out he'd rigged it? He said. 4 days ago, a week after the meeting. She turned toward him, and he finally looked at her directly, and she looked worse up close than she had from a distance. Not fragile, but stripped of something. Like a layer she normally maintained had been removed. An internal auditor, a woman named Cassie Park. She's been with us 3 years. She found a payment trail that didn't line up with any approved vendor contract. She brought it to me privately. At first it looked like a billing error. Then I started pulling threads. What did you find? Consulting payments routed through 2 shell companies to a private LLC that turns out to be registered to a business partner of one of the city planning department's assistant directors. She said it with the controlled precision of someone who has organized very bad information into the most transmissible form. The payments started in August last year. They cover 5 separate acquisition deals over the last 18 months. Oak Ridge is the largest, but it's not the only one. Nathan put his coffee cup down on the bench beside him. He's been doing this for 5 deals, he said. At least 5 that we've traced so far. And you didn't know about any of them. She was quiet for a moment. It was not the quiet of someone preparing a defense. It was the quiet of someone sitting very still inside a thing that has fully arrived. I didn't know about the payments. I didn't know about the shell companies. I didn't know about the city contacts. A pause. I knew Richard operated close to the edge of what I was comfortable with. I let him operate there because he produced results and because he had board support and because I was managing so much else that She stopped again. I made a choice to not look too hard at certain things. That's not the same as not knowing, but it's also not innocent. Nathan looked at her. That's an honest thing to say, he said. I've been thinking about honesty a lot this week. He looked away. Back at the path, at the wet park, and the gray November morning, and the bench that was the same bench as October, though October felt very far from here. You hid who you were, he said. It came out level, not accusatory, just a fact that needed to be said. Yes. For months. Yes. Even after... He didn't finish the sentence. She knew what it contained. Even after, she said. She didn't offer explanation. I want to explain it to you, but I'm not going to pretend it was right. Explain it anyway. She was quiet for a moment, and this was a thinking quiet, a real one. When I called you the first time, when I was Bella and not Isabella Hart, I was a person who had not been allowed to just be a person for a very long time. Everyone in my professional world knows who I am. They treat me accordingly. They're strategic about it, even when they don't mean to be. They pitch things at me. They need things from me. They perform different versions of themselves around me based on what they want. She paused. You had no idea who I was. You let me sit at your kitchen table and eat overdone pizza and fix your daughter's alarm system, and you talked to me like I was a person who had walked in off the street, because that's what you thought I was. And you liked that enough to keep lying about it. She flinched, not dramatically, just a small tightening around her eyes. Yes, she said. I kept thinking I'd tell you. I'd find the moment and tell you, and we could... I don't know what I thought would happen, that it would be okay somehow, that the thing we were building was solid enough by then to survive it. You were going to tell me. I was. When? I'd scheduled it in my head for the week after the Oak Ridge meeting. She said it with a bitterness directed entirely at herself. I had a plan. It was a terrible plan. The meeting came first. Nathan looked at the path. He thought about what Marsh had told him yesterday, about Thorne and the preliminary agreements and the case being built to remove her. He thought about the woman who had come to a sick apartment with a pharmacy bag and a blanket she'd bought specifically for 3 sick 5-year-olds and then hadn't mentioned it. He thought about the kitchen and the pizza and the 2 hours at the Anchor and Sophie with the Turns book. He thought about the line between the things she'd hidden and the things she hadn't known were hidden. It was not a clean line, but it was a real one. Thorne, he said. What are you going to do about Thorne? The air between them shifted. He felt her straighten slightly. Not defensive, something more like orientation, the way a person squares up to a specific direction. I've already started, she said. What does that mean? Cassie has been documenting everything since she brought it to me. All 5 deals, the payment trails, the vendor records, the communications she's been able to access. I have an attorney, not the company's attorneys, a private one I've used for personal matters, and we've been building the file for 4 days. She said it without drama, factually, like reading from a list. Yesterday, I contacted the city's ethics commission independently, not through the company, privately. Nathan looked at her. That's going to blow up your company, he said. It's going to blow up Richard's part of my company. It might not stop there. I know. She didn't look away. If it doesn't stop there, it doesn't stop there. I'm not... She stopped. Started again with a different approach. My father built that company. He built it with the understanding that what you build should mean something, not just financially, something. He used to say that a development company has 2 choices. You can extract from a place, or you can leave it better than you found it. He believed the second one was both the right thing to do and ultimately the better business model. She paused. Richard has been running the first model with my name on it, and I missed it, or I looked away from it, and that's on me. But I'm not going to look away from it now. The park was quiet around them. Nathan picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. There's a journalist, he said, Daniel Marsh, Bay Area Courier. He reached out to me yesterday. Something moved through Isabella's expression. Not surprise, but confirmation, like a piece fitting into a shape she'd already been building. He's been digging into the Oak Ridge deal for months. My communications team flagged him 3 weeks ago. He has a source inside your company. I suspected that. A pause. What did he tell you? Nathan told her what Marsh had said. The preliminary agreements, the July city contacts, the theory about Thorne using Oak Ridge to build a case against her with the board. He told it the same way she'd told him things. Level, complete, without theatrical pausing for effect. When he finished, she was looking at the path, her jaw set in a way he hadn't seen before. The board angle, she said. That's the piece I hadn't fully mapped. Is it true? She thought about it. Really thought, not performed consideration. Richard has been making noise about growth pace for 2 years. He thinks I've been too conservative, too focused on community engagement, too slow to move on large acquisitions, too willing to walk away from deals that don't meet a certain, he calls it a values filter. The last 2 words came out with a dryness that didn't quite conceal what was underneath it. He has 3 board members who are aligned with him on this. I have 6 who are aligned with me. It's not a coup. But if Oak Ridge succeeds on his terms, and I'm associated with a project that then comes apart because of his corruption, the narrative writes itself. The aggressive CEO, who burned a neighborhood for a profit and didn't manage her own board. He sets the fire and makes sure you're holding the match, Nathan said. Yes. So what does your plan look like, specifically? She turned toward him again. I've prepared a full disclosure package, the payment evidence, the city contacts, the vendor shell companies. I'm going to present it to the full board next week before Richard can move on his timeline. I'm also preparing a public statement that acknowledges the Oak Ridge process was compromised and recommends nullifying the acquisition proposal. Nullifying it? The deal shouldn't move forward, not on these terms. She held his gaze. Which means Oak Ridge goes back to a legitimate process. Nathan was quiet. That's your company, he said. A deal you've been working on for months. A deal Richard was working on my name. Her voice had an edge now, thin but real. I won't keep it. You know this might not save your position even if it works. The board could decide you're a liability regardless. I know. You could lose the CEO chair, lose the company. I know, Nathan. He looked at her. She looked back. Why? He said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that it wasn't a reflex answer. Because Sophie cried when I read about the turns, she said. Not sad crying, something else. And I asked her why, and she said it was because they always come back. No matter how far they go, they always come back to the same place. She paused. And I realized I've spent the last 6 years going further and further from anything that resembled a place worth coming back to. And I don't want to keep doing that, even if it costs me what it costs me. Nathan looked at the duck pond, at the gray November park, at the bench they were sitting on. He didn't say anything for a while. She didn't push. She'd gotten good at that, he thought, at not pushing, which was a thing you learned from other people, and he wondered when she'd learned it. What do you need from me? He said. Nothing. She said it quickly. I'm not here to ask you for anything. I'm here because I owe you the truth. And because She stopped. The last time you asked me to tell you something, I said not today. And then I ran out of todays, and I don't want to do that again. That's not what I mean, Nathan said. I mean practically. What do you need to make this work? Marcia's piece runs in 3 days. You're presenting to the board next week. What does this need to land correctly? She looked at him with an expression that crossed several emotions in quick succession without fully landing on any of them. If you gave a statement to Marsh, she said carefully, corroborating the community impact, as the competing bid, it would give his piece more than community impact, Nathan said. I'll give him the full competing proposal, the process timeline, the dates, everything that shows when the outcome was predetermined. That's more useful than a quote. Nathan, my firm is done by February if the deal stands, he said. I have 3 daughters and a lease and a drafting table I've been paying off for 5 years. And if I do nothing, I'm in the same position in February anyway. So, he picked up the cold coffee and drank the last of it. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do and because Oak Ridge deserves better. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay. They sat with it for a moment. The decision made, the shape of the next few weeks assembling itself between them, with all its uncertainty and weight. Then Nathan said, The thing about not telling me who you were. Yes. I'm not done being angry about it. I know. But I understand it, which is not the same as being done being angry. No, she said. It's not. He looked at her. You should have told me. I should have told you. You had time. You had... I know. Her voice was quiet. I know I did. I kept moving it, and then one night I came to your apartment with wine, and you had flour on your shirt, and you looked at me like I was... You looked at me like I was worth looking at, and I didn't want to be the person who changed that look. A pause. That was selfish. Recognizing it now doesn't undo it. Nathan looked at the empty coffee cup in his hand. No, he said. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable. Not resolved. The kind of silence that lives in the space between a thing being broken and a thing being fixed, when neither state has fully established itself yet. The girls, he said. Isabella's expression shifted. How are they? She said. Her voice had a different quality now. The composure dropped for a moment like a coat coming off. Mia asks about the rocks, he said. Whether you're bringing more. Something passed through her face that she didn't try to hide or manage. And Sophie? Sophie hasn't said much, which is how she handles the big things. And Lily? Nathan thought about the paper flower on his kitchen counter. Small, not large. The way Lily had held it up and said it is better. Lily made a paper flower your way, he said. The small kind. Isabella pressed her lips together, just for a second. Tell her, she started. Tell her yourself, he said. If this works, if you do what you're saying you're going to do and the other side of it looks the way you want it to look. He paused. Then tell her yourself. She looked at him. He looked at her. Okay, she said. They stood up from the bench at the same time, which was uncoordinated and a little awkward, the way real things usually were. The park path stretched in both directions. The morning had gotten fractionally lighter. I need to call Cassie, Isabella said, and my attorney, and I should probably reach out to Marsh before you do, so he knows so he understands what I'm doing and why. I'll wait until this afternoon, Nathan said. Give you the morning. Thank you. He shoved his hands in his coat pockets. I'm still not sure this works, he said, even with everything in place. The board might not. Thorne has 3 votes and connections, and I know it might not work, she said. I'm doing it anyway. He nodded. She started up the path toward the park entrance. He watched her go, the dark coat and the unhurried pace and the particular quality of someone who has made a decision that was going to cost something and has set down the cost and is walking toward the thing anyway. Then she stopped. She turned back. Nathan. Her voice carried over the 20 feet between them with the clarity of the cold morning. He waited. I'm sorry, she said. Just that. Without qualification or accompaniment. He held it. I know, he said. She turned back and kept walking. The week that followed was one of the stranger weeks of Nathan's life, and he'd had some strange weeks. He called Marsh that afternoon and arranged to meet him the following morning with the full Cole architecture proposal documentation, including the time-stamped submission records that Marsh could use to establish when the competing bids had been formally entered into a process that had apparently already been shaped around a different conclusion. Marsh took everything Nathan brought and thanked him with the focused brevity of someone who knows what they've just been given. The piece was filed within 24 hours of their meeting. Meanwhile, Nathan learned the shape of what Isabella was doing through fragments. A text here, a short call there, never long and never dramatic. The factual briefings of someone managing a crisis with both hands and limited bandwidth. Cassie Park had completed the documentation audit. The private attorney had reviewed the evidence package. Isabella had requested an emergency board meeting for the following Tuesday. On Saturday, she texted him. Richard knows something is coming. He's been calling board members individually since Thursday. Nathan wrote back, What does that mean for Tuesday? A pause, then, It means Tuesday is going to be ugly. He sat with that. He was at the kitchen table with the Oak Ridge proposal in front of him, not revising it, just looking at it. The East Wing floor plan, the corridor, the clerestory window that finally solved the light problem after 5 revisions and an overnight where he'd almost given up on it. Lily came and leaned against the table beside him. Is that the building? She said. Yes. The community one? Yes. She studied the floor plan with the serious look she gave things she was genuinely thinking about. Can I come see it? When it's built, if it gets built, yes. Is it going to get built? He looked at the drawing. I don't know yet, he said. But you want it to. Yes, I want it to. She considered this. Then, wanting things is good, she said, with the confident authority of someone who has always wanted things loudly and seen no reason to stop. Sophie says wanting things is scary. I think she's wrong. Sophie isn't wrong, Nathan said. Wanting things is scary. That doesn't mean you shouldn't. Lily thought about this. Is Bella going to come back? He looked at his daughter. I think so. I don't know. Is it still complicated? Yes. More complicated than before? Different complicated. Lily seemed to weigh this taxonomy. Complicated is okay, she said finally, with the tone of someone extending a significant concession. As long as people are trying. She went back to whatever she'd been doing. Nathan looked at the floor plan. He thought about what Lily had just said with the kind of attention he usually reserved for structural problems. As long as people are trying. It was reductive in the way that 5-year-old wisdom was always reductive, which meant it cut through the things that adult reasoning built up around the actual point. He thought about Isabella at Crane Park that morning. The dark coat, the stripped quality, the complete absence of the composure she normally maintained. A woman who had arrived at a park bench at 8 in the morning to tell the truth because she'd run out of alternatives that were better than the truth. He thought about the pay trail and the shell companies and the 4 days she'd spent building a case instead of protecting herself. He thought about what it cost a person to take a thing they'd spent years constructing and decide it mattered less than getting something right. He didn't know what Tuesday was going to look like. He didn't know what February looked like. He didn't know whether the corridor with the light was going to exist or whether it was going to stay a drawing on a table in a small apartment on Clement Street while the neighborhood it was meant for got replaced by glass towers and retail corridors. He didn't know. But he knew what Isabella was doing and why she was doing it, and he knew what it was costing her to do it. That, at least, he knew. Sunday went by quietly. Monday, Marcia's piece ran in the Bay Area Courier's digital edition with the headline, "Rigged from the Start, How Hart Development Group's Oak Ridge Bid Was Decided." 4 months before the public had a say. It was thorough, sourced, careful. It named Thorne specifically. It included the shell company documentation. It included Nathan's statement about the coal architecture proposal and the timeline evidence. It included a statement from a city planning department spokesperson that was sufficiently non-committal to confirm that people were very worried. By noon Monday, the piece had been picked up by 2 regional outlets. By 3 o'clock, there were people from the Oak Ridge community gathering outside the Hart Development offices on Market Street with handmade signs that had been made quickly and looked at. At 4:15, Nathan's phone buzzed. Isabella. Tuesday moved to tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. Richard called an emergency session before I could. Nathan, he's trying to get ahead of it. Isabella. Yes. A pause. Nathan. Are you ready? Another pause. Longer this time. Isabella. I've been ready for 4 days. I just didn't know it yet. He stared at the message. He wrote back, "Call me when it's over." Her response came immediately, 3 words, and he looked at them for a long time in the afternoon light of his kitchen. "I will, promise." He put his phone down. The girls came home from school. Mia had a new diagram she wanted to show him. Sophie had found a feather in the playground that she thought might be from a migratory bird, though she acknowledged it was more likely a pigeon. Lily had opinions about the school lunch that she delivered as a formal grievance. He listened to all of it. He made dinner. He sat at the table with 3 daughters and the ordinary weight of an ordinary evening, and he thought about a boardroom he'd never seen and a woman walking into it in the morning with a file full of evidence and the kind of specific courage that doesn't announce itself as courage, because the person doing it is too focused on the doing to notice what it is. He thought about Lily's paper flower on the counter. He thought about the corridor. He thought about February. He went to bed at 11 and lay awake until past midnight and then finally slept. The call came at 9:47 Tuesday morning. Nathan was at his drafting table, not drawing, just sitting in the specific suspended state of someone waiting for news that will determine a significant portion of their near future. He had his coffee. He had the Oak Ridge floor plan. He had not touched either of them in 40 minutes. His phone lit up. He answered before the second ring. "It's me." Her voice was different than it had been at the park. Not composed exactly, but compressed. The way a voice gets when it has been holding a great deal of weight for several hours and is still holding it, and the holding has become physical. "Tell me," he said. A pause. He heard something in the background. Voices. A door. The particular ambient sound of a large office building. "It went for 3 hours," she said. "Richard came in with everything he had. He'd spent the weekend calling board members individually, and he had talking points, and he had a counter-narrative. He said I'd orchestrated the ethics complaint to remove him before he could call a no-confidence vote. He said the shell company payments were approved under a legacy vendor arrangement from before I took over. Her voice was level through all of this, but the levelness had a cost. He had 2 of the 3 board members I thought he had, plus 1 I didn't expect. How many total? 14 on the board. He had 4. A pause. I had 9. Nathan closed his eyes. 1 abstained, she added. Margaret Foss. She's been on the board since my father's time, and she told both of us before the vote that she was too old to watch a family destroy itself over a boardroom. The vote was for what specifically? For accepting my disclosure package as grounds for launching a formal investigation, removing Richard from his position pending the investigation's outcome, and recommending to the city that the Oak Ridge acquisition proposal be withdrawn. She paused. 9-4. It passed. Nathan sat with that. The drafting table in front of him, the floor plan, the corridor. Isabella, he said, I know. Her voice fractured just slightly, the way it sometimes fractured when something got through the managed exterior. That small break he'd first noticed in October on a park bench. It was bigger now, a real crack, not a hairline one. Are you okay? He said. I don't know yet. Honest, as always, when she stopped performing fine. Richard left the room without speaking to me. He has an attorney already. It's not over. The investigation will take months. There will be lawyers and depositions, and the company's going to have a very hard year. But you're still in the chair. I'm still in the chair. A sound that was almost a laugh but was too tired to complete itself. For now. Margaret told me afterward that she didn't vote because she wanted me to earn it. Not from her, from myself. What did she mean? She meant I let this happen by not looking. And she's right, and I have to build back from that. She paused. I told the board that part myself. I didn't want to win by making Richard the only villain in the room. I told them I missed things I should have seen, and I told them why, and I told them what I was going to do differently. Nathan thought about that. About the kind of person it takes to stand in front of a room where your position is at stake and say, I missed things I should have seen without dressing it up. What about Oak Ridge, he said. The withdrawal recommendation goes to the city today, formally, with a letter from me and the full evidence package. She paused. The city planning department is going to have its own problems to deal with. The assistant director and the payment trail and whatever else comes out of the investigation. The Oak Ridge process will have to restart from the beginning. A clean process, she confirmed, which means your proposal is still in play. He looked at the floor plan, the corridor, the clerestory, the light. There's no guarantee, she said. It's a real competition this time. Other firms will bid. The city makes the call. I know. I just want you to know I'm not in a position to... I know, he said again. I'm not asking you to do anything. That's not what I want. A silence. The background noise from her end had quieted. She'd moved somewhere more private, he thought. Her office, maybe. The particular quiet of a large office after a very long meeting. Nathan, she said. Yeah. Thank you for the statement, for Marsh, for... She stopped. For coming to the park yesterday morning instead of just being done with me. He leaned back in his chair. He thought about the park bench in October and the park bench in November, and the distance between them measured not in weeks, but in what had happened inside those weeks. He thought about a crumpled receipt out in a coat pocket. 3 5-year-olds in a line. I have a rule, he said, that I inherited from someone wise who is currently 5 years old. She says complicated is okay as long as people are trying. A long pause. Tell her I'm trying, Isabella said. Tell her yourself, he said. Same thing he'd said in the park. When this settles enough, come tell her yourself. The line was quiet. Then, okay. They hung up. Nathan sat at the drafting table for a while. Then he picked up his pencil and he went back to the Oak Ridge proposal, and he started from the beginning, not because anything was wrong with it, but because the process was starting over and he wanted the proposal to be as good as it could possibly be. And going back to the beginning was how you found the things you'd stopped seeing after too many revisions. He worked for 4 hours straight. The process of rebuilding the Oak Ridge bid took the rest of November and the first 2 weeks of December, during which time Nathan's professional life and personal life occupied parallel tracks that occasionally intersected and mostly ran alongside each other without quite merging. Marcus, when Nathan called him with the update about the withdrawal and the clean process, was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So we're back in it. We're back in it. Legitimately. Legitimately." Another pause. "How long do we have before the revised submission deadline?" 8 weeks. That's tight. It's enough, Nathan said, with a conviction he'd decided to have rather than one he'd arrived at naturally. And he found that after a couple of days of deciding to have it, it started feeling earned. He submitted the revised proposal on December 14th. He'd changed 3 things from the original: a materials specification in the north wing that he'd always been slightly wrong about, a site access plan that accounted for school pickup times 2 blocks away that he'd overlooked in the first draft, and the corridor. Not structurally. But he'd added a note in the design narrative that he hadn't included before, a paragraph about what the light in the corridor was for, not aesthetic description, but functional, about what it means for a building to feel like it belongs to the people inside it, to feel like it was designed for a specific Tuesday afternoon rather than a photograph. He hadn't planned to write it. It came out at midnight on December 13th, and he read it back and left it in. Meanwhile, the investigation into Richard Thorne and the city planning department was doing what investigations do, moving slowly, accumulating mass, and periodically surfacing in Marsh's coverage with new details that each time renewed public attention on the Oak Ridge situation. Thorne had retained 2 attorneys. The assistant director of city planning had taken administrative leave. 2 of the subsidiary shell companies had been dissolved within 48 hours of the initial courier piece, which the investigation noted with the particular interest of investigators who understand what the timing of a dissolution means. Nathan followed the coverage the way you follow weather when you're waiting to see if it will reach you, with attention, but without the ability to affect the outcome. He did not speak to Isabella during those weeks, not because of a decision, more because the space between them had a weight to it that needed time before either of them could stand in it comfortably, and they both seemed to understand this without discussing it. She texted twice, once to tell him the formal investigation had been officially opened by the City Ethics Commission, once to send a photograph with no caption. The photograph was of a hallway in what appeared to be the Hart Development offices, and mounted on the wall was a framed print of her father's original company mission statement, handwritten on a piece of paper and photographed rather than typeset. Nathan read it twice and understood why she'd sent it without a caption. He sent back, "He built something worth keeping." Her response? "Working on it." The girls asked about her with varying frequencies and approaches. Mia asked directly and accepted the answer that things were complicated and moved on with the efficiency of someone who has filed the information correctly and is done with it. Sophie asked once, very quietly, one evening while Nathan was reading to her, stopped him mid-paragraph and said, "Is Bella still out there?" With the particular phrasing of someone who means something specific by out there, some version of still existing in the world and still being the person she'd decided to trust. "Yes," Nathan said. "She's still out there." Sophie nodded and told him to keep reading. Lily did not ask. Lily waited, which was unusual enough for Lily that Nathan noticed it. She kept making paper flowers, the small kind for clusters, and she kept them in a cup on the kitchen counter next to the first one, and she did not say anything about them, which in Lily's language was itself a form of saying something. The courthouse hearing, as it came to be called, though it was technically a City Planning Commission extraordinary session rather than a formal court proceeding, was scheduled for the 2nd week of January. The purpose was to formally address the Oak Ridge acquisition withdrawal, review the ethics investigation findings that were ready for public presentation, and establish the parameters for a new legitimate competitive process going forward. Nathan had been asked to attend as a representative of the competing bid that had been disadvantaged by the original process. He'd said yes before the question was fully finished. He arranged childcare for the morning, Renata from upstairs, who had become reliable enough that Nathan had stopped feeling bad about asking. And he put on the gray jacket that he'd finally gotten dry cleaned, and he drove to the Civic Center. The hearing room was not the auditorium. It was a smaller chamber, more formal, with the kind of wood paneling that communicated the weight of decisions made in the room over decades. There were perhaps 80 people present, community members from Oak Ridge, city officials, representatives from the planning department, journalists including Marsh, who had a notepad and a very good seat near the front. Nathan sat in the third row. He looked at the room. He thought about the last time he'd been in this building, when he'd walked out the side door into a cold November evening, not knowing what he knew now. He thought about all the things that had been in motion in that evening without his awareness. The payment trails, the shell companies, the board relationships, the investigation that hadn't been opened yet but was already being built from the inside. He thought about a woman at a podium in a dark blazer who was simultaneously the person who had sat at his kitchen table and the person who had made a choice that was going to damage both of them before it had a chance to not damage them. He thought about the distance between not knowing something and choosing not to look. He thought about how that distance was real and how it was also not always as large as the person standing in it needed it to be. He thought about how it was possible to understand something and still be angry about it. How understanding was not the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, and none of those things were the same as deciding to keep going. He was still thinking about this when the chamber doors opened at the far end and Isabella Hart walked in. She was not alone. She came in with two people Nathan didn't recognize, her attorney, he guessed, and someone from the company. But she walked ahead of them in a way that was both professional and solitary, the way a person walks when they understand that what they're about to do is ultimately theirs to do, and no one else can carry the weight of it for them. She was in the dark blazer again, or a similar one, her hair back. The composure in place, but different now. Not the composure of distance, of someone managing to stay removed from what was happening around her. Something more grounded than that, more present. She did not look for him in the room. He did not expect her to. The session opened with a statement from the chair of the Planning Commission, a formal account of the circumstances that had led to the session, the evidence that had been reviewed, the determinations that had been made. It was read in the careful language of official proceedings, which had the dual quality of making serious things sound procedural and making procedural things sound serious, and which Nathan had learned over years of city meetings to decode for the substance underneath. The substance was, the Oak Ridge acquisition had been compromised from its inception. The city planning department had facilitated the compromise through the conduct of specific individuals now under investigation. The competitive process had been neither competitive nor genuinely open. The city accepted the Hart Development Group's voluntary withdrawal and recommended the full nullification of all agreements, preliminary and otherwise, associated with the original proposal. Then Isabella was asked to speak. She stood at the table rather than a podium. This was a smaller room, no podium, and she had a prepared statement in front of her that she looked at for approximately the first two sentences and then set aside. What she said without the paper was this. She said that Hart Development Group had submitted the withdrawal because it was the right thing to do, not the legally compelled thing, not the reputationally strategic thing, but the right thing, and she understood the distinction mattered. She said the conduct that had compromised the process had been conducted by a company officer acting outside his sanctioned authority, and that she took responsibility for the oversight failure that had allowed it to continue as long as it had, and that taking responsibility was not the same as asserting it hadn't happened on her watch, because it had. She said the Oak Ridge neighborhood deserved a process that was actually what it claimed to be. She said she was making a personal financial commitment, not corporate, personal, to fund independent oversight of the new process to ensure it could not be similarly compromised. She gave a number that produced an audible reaction in the room, not enormous by the standards of someone with her resources, but significant enough, and given as a personal commitment rather than a company one, which Nathan understood the significance of in a way some people in the room might not have. Then she said one more thing. She said that the Cole Architecture Community Center proposal had been the strongest submission in the original process on its merits, and that she was entering this as a formal statement for the public record, and that while she had no authority over the outcome of the new process, she believed the commission should know that an objective evaluation of the original field had a clear frontrunner that the corrupted process had been designed to prevent from winning. The room had a quality of particular attention after she said it. Nathan looked at his hands. He was aware of something happening in his chest that was complicated and warm and not entirely composed, and he was in a public hearing, so he managed it, but only approximately. When the session concluded, the formal findings were read, the determinations were entered into the record, and the chair announced that the parameters for the new competitive process would be published within 30 days. People began to move and gather, and the room acquired the noise of 80 people doing the things people do after a significant official event. Nathan stood. Across the room, Isabella had been approached by several people. Her attorney, a city official, two community members who seemed to have things to say to her that required saying. She was handling all of it with the composed professionalism of her role, shaking hands, listening, saying the right things. Nathan watched her without moving toward her, partly because the room was crowded and partly because he was still deciding something. Then Marsh appeared at his elbow. "Strong statement from heart," Marsh said. "The one about your proposal." "Yes," Nathan said. "That cost her something. On the record like that." "I know." Marsh looked at him. He had the observational quality of a journalist who sees more than he writes about. "You two know each other," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Is that—" He stopped, edited himself. Off-the-record question. "Ask it." "Is it going to be okay?" Nathan looked across the room at Isabella, who was now speaking to one of the Oak Ridge community members, an older man with a cane who had been at every public meeting Nathan had ever attended about the neighborhood, a man named Delgado, who had lived on the same street in Oak Ridge for 40 years and who was not easy to satisfy and did not pretend otherwise. She was listening to him, not with the professional listening that is actually waiting for a pause to respond, actually listening, her hands at her sides, her posture without performance. The man finished talking. She said something Nathan couldn't hear. The man looked at her for a long moment, the assessing look of someone who doesn't extend trust easily and is deciding whether to begin. Then he nodded. Not enthusiastically, but he nodded. "I think so," Nathan told Marsh. "Eventually." He moved through the room. She saw him when he was about 10 feet away. Whatever she had been preparing for, some version of how this would go, some expectation she'd assembled in the days before, seemed to arrive and then prove unnecessary when she saw his face, because his face was doing something that made the preparation irrelevant. "Your statement," he said, "about the proposal. It was the truth. You didn't have to put it on the record. It was still the truth." She held his gaze. "I wanted the record to have it." He stood in front of her and thought about October and November and December and all the specific ordinary moments that had accumulated between them in the months before the ordinary was interrupted. The kitchen table and the soup and the river rocks and the Arctic terns and the sick apartment and the pizza that was more philosophical than practical. He thought about all of it sitting next to the auditorium and the logo on the screen and the November park and the very particular weight of a lie of omission that is also genuinely a lie. He thought about how people were not only their worst choices, but they were not separate from their worst choices either. He thought about Lily's rule. "The new process timeline," he said. 30 days for the parameters. Probably 60 days for submissions after that. "Approximately," she said. "So March, maybe, before we know anything. Probably March." "That's a long time." She watched him. "Are you asking me something?" He looked at her. "I'm asking if you want to have dinner Saturday. The girls are going to be disappointed if you don't. And honestly, I don't think I'm up for managing that conversation." Something happened in her expression, the fracture again, except this time it was larger and it stayed open rather than closing, and what came through it was not small or careful or managed. "Saturday," she said. 6 o'clock. "I won't make philosophical pizza. I'll make actual pasta, which Lily has been vouching for, and I intend to finally prove." "I'll be there at 5:50, she said, "with wine, and something for Mia." "More rocks?" "I was thinking actual counterweights, small ones, from a hardware store." He laughed. It came out surprised and genuine and louder than he'd intended in the formal wood-paneled room, and a few people nearby looked over, and he didn't particularly care. 5:50, he said. "Don't be late." "I'm always slightly late." "I know, I've factored it in." She almost said something else. He could see it. A different conversation they could have been having, a heavier one, a longer accounting of everything that had happened and what it meant for what came after. All of it was real, and all of it would need to be said, at some point, in some kitchen at some hour, when the girls were asleep, and there was enough quiet to hold the weight of it properly. But not here. Not today. Today had already held a lot. "I'll see you Saturday," she said. "See you Saturday," he said. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do when you have 3 5-year-olds, loudly, with a disagreement about breakfast, and 15 minutes ahead of schedule because someone woke up early and woke up everyone else by accident, and then pretended it was an accident with the specific poorly acted innocence of a person who absolutely did it on purpose. Nathan made pancakes. He managed the breakfast disagreement, which was about whether pancakes could be made into shapes, which they could, and he made a bird for Sophie and a machine of unspecified function for Mia that she accepted as accurate and a flower for Lily that Lily said was almost right, and then ate with complete satisfaction. He cleaned the kitchen. He thought about the clerestory window and the corridor. The commission had published the new process parameters 2 days ago. The deadline for revised submissions was March 5th. Cole Architecture had already filed for inclusion in the new process. Nathan had read the parameters 3 times and found them exactly what they were supposed to be: legitimate, specific, without any of the constructed narrowness that retrospectively made the original process legible as designed around a predetermined outcome. The playing field was flat. He would have to compete on the merits. He was prepared to compete on the merits. He thought about the note he'd added to the design narrative, the paragraph about Tuesday afternoons and what a building is for. He thought about the corridor with the light, and he thought about how much of himself had gone into that floor plan over 4 months, and how all of it was still intact and ready to be submitted to a process that would actually read it. The doorbell rang at 5:53, which meant she was almost on time, which was its own form of trying. He opened the door and she was in jeans and the comfortable sweater again, the one that had been expensive once and was now genuinely worn in, and she had wine in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. "Hardware store," she said, holding up the bag. "Counterweights. 8 different sizes. I didn't know which would work best, so I got all of them." He took the bag and looked inside. 8 small metal weights, the kind used for balancing model mechanisms, in graduated sizes and neatly organized in a small plastic tray. "She's going to lose her mind," he said. "That's the intention." He stepped back from the door. She came in. The apartment was warm and smelled like garlic and the sauce that had been going since 2 o'clock, and from the hallway came the sound of 3 5-year-old voices arguing about something that resolved into Lily's voice carrying over the others with the authority she considered her natural right. Then the arguing stopped. 3 sets of feet came down the hallway with the specific velocity of children who have been told not to run and are not running, technically. Mia got there first. She looked at Isabella, then at the bag in Nathan's hand, then back at Isabella. "Did you bring counterweights?" she said. "Not a question, an assessment." 8 kinds, Isabella said. Mia grabbed the bag with both hands and disappeared back down the hallway without a word, which was the highest form of Mia approval. Sophie came next, slower, and stopped a few feet away. She looked at Isabella with the careful gravity of a person re-establishing something that had been interrupted and needs to be re-established properly. "You came back," Sophie said. "I came back," Isabella said. Sophie considered this. Then she crossed the remaining distance and leaned against Isabella's side with the specific weight of a small person who trusts the surface they've chosen to lean on. Isabella's hand came up and rested on Sophie's shoulder. It stayed there. Lily was last. She stood in the hallway entrance and looked at Isabella with an expression that was attempting composure and not quite managing it, which for Lily was notable. In her hand was one of the paper flowers from the cup on the kitchen counter, small, clustered, the kind Isabella had argued for, and that had turned out to be right. She walked over and held it out. "I made these while you were gone," she said. "I kept making them." Isabella took it. She looked at it for a moment. A small paper flower in a 5-year-old's handwork, slightly uneven, the stem a little crooked, the color yellow from construction paper that had been in the kitchen drawer since August. She looked at it with the expression Nathan had first seen in October on a park bench, the one he'd understood even before he had words for it, the fracture, the thing coming through without permission. "It's perfect," Isabella said. "It's small," Lily said. "Small is better for clusters." "I know, I was right about that." "You were," Lily admitted. "You can sit on the couch. Sophie will probably want to do the birds book again." "I was counting on it," Isabella said. Lily gave a single nod, the nod of someone who has reviewed the information and found it satisfactory, and went to find Sophie. Nathan stood in the hallway and watched all of this. He was holding the door to his own apartment, which he'd forgotten to close, and the evening air was coming in cold from the outside and the apartment was warm behind him. He closed the door. Isabella looked at him over Sophie's head. Her expression was complicated in the way that real things are complicated. The kind of complicated that doesn't simplify over time, but that you can learn to stand inside. It had the specific quality of something new that had been paid for honestly and was still being learned. He went to the kitchen. He checked the sauce. He thought about the corridor and the light and the March deadline and the February that Marcus had feared and that had arrived without the catastrophe they'd been bracing for, not because the situation had changed, it hadn't, not yet, but because the situation now had a possible future that it hadn't had in November. And a possible future is not nothing. It's actually most of what you need. From the living room, Sophie's voice reciting the opening line of the Arctic Turns chapter from memory, which meant she'd decided Isabella should read it from the beginning, even though she knew it already, because some things are worth repeating not because you've forgotten them, but because they mean something different when you hear them out loud with someone else. From the hallway, the precise metallic clink of 8 graduated counterweights being sorted and tested, and Mia's voice saying something technical about load distribution that was largely accurate, which would have been alarming if it weren't also a perfectly Mia thing. From the kitchen table, a paper flower in a cup beside 7 other paper flowers. Small ones, the kind that make a better cluster, that had been made over the course of 8 weeks by a 5-year-old who did not ask the questions out loud but kept making the flowers anyway. Because waiting and making were not different things when you were 5 and you understood that some things were worth being patient for. Nathan stirred the sauce. The apartment was warm. Outside, San Francisco was doing what San Francisco did in January, gray and cold and entirely itself. The city that never quite matched any postcard of it, that was too expensive and too crowded and too much at odds with itself, and also, genuinely, one of the most particular and irreplaceable places in the world. The kind of place where neighborhoods had histories that mattered and where people had been fighting for those histories for as long as the neighborhoods had existed, and where sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, the fight was worth having, and the people having it made something that lasted. He thought about Oak Ridge, about the families 2 blocks from the empty lot, about the corridor with the light, about what it meant to build something that a Tuesday afternoon could actually live inside. He thought about his wife, briefly and honestly, the way he allowed himself to think about her, not the grief, which had its own room and always would, but the person, the laugh, the specific quality of her attention when she was interested in something. He thought about what she would have made of all this, the park bench, the phone number, the river rocks, the billing error that turned out not to be a billing error. He thought she would have found it absurd and instructive and probably would have said, in the dry way she had, that the most important decisions in his life had always been made by other people on his behalf, and that this was a pattern he should probably examine. He would have agreed. He would have said that not all patterns were problems. She would have thought about it and then said, no, that one isn't. He turned off the burner. He called the girls for dinner. They came from different directions. Sophie and Isabella from the couch, Mia from the hallway with a counterweight in each hand and an expression of someone who has solved something and is prepared to explain it. Lily from wherever Lily had been, which turned out to be the bedroom, where she'd apparently been making more flowers, because she arrived at the table with 3 new ones in her hand and put them in the cup without ceremony. They sat down. Nathan served the pasta. He waited. Lily twirled a forkful, put it in her mouth, chewed with the focused concentration of a professional evaluator. Then she looked at Isabella. "It's good," she said. "I was right." "You're very gracious," Isabella said. "I know I'm right. There's nothing gracious about it." Sophie ate her pasta and said nothing, which meant she agreed. Mia ate hers without looking up from the counterweight she'd placed beside her plate, which she touched periodically with one finger in the thinking way she had. Nathan ate his pasta at his kitchen table in his small apartment on Clement Street, with the radiator that knocked and the cabinet that now closed correctly and the stain near the edge that hadn't quite come out. With 3 daughters who had managed somehow, in the specific way that 5-year-olds manage things, to understand something important before any of the adults in the room had gotten there. That loneliness was not a permanent condition. That a stranger was only a stranger until someone decided they weren't. That the most important things, trust and honesty, and the willingness to keep trying after the trying has cost you something, were not things you either had or didn't have. They were things you chose, repeatedly. On ordinary Wednesday mornings, and in park benches in October, and at kitchen tables at 9 o'clock, and in boardrooms where the vote could go the other way, and you did it anyway. They were things you chose until the choosing became who you were. Isabella looked at Nathan across the table. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. The apartment was warm and the pasta was good, and through the window the January city was doing its January thing, and 3 5-year-olds were filling the kitchen with the specific abundant noise of people who have not yet learned to be economical with their presence in a room. There was still the March deadline, the investigation and the depositions, and the company that had a hard year ahead of it. There was still the question of what trust looks like after it's been broken and rebuilt, which is a different thing than trust that's never been tested, and not lesser, but not the same. There was still the work. There was always still the work. But there was this too, a table, a meal, a Wednesday morning habit that had become a Saturday evening habit that was becoming, slowly and without being forced into a shape it wasn't ready for, simply a habit. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that you notice one day has been there long enough to have worn a groove. Outside, it began to rain. The radiator knocked twice. Lily asked for more pasta. Nathan served it.